Hey guys, this is Aidan, one of the hosts of Kino Inferno, as I'm sure you already know, and the reason I'm dropping in before the theme music today is I'm just delivering a quick content warning, which we thought was prudent because the first film that we discuss on today's episode is Black Christmas, the 2019 version, which, if you know anything about that movie, it covers some pretty hard-hitting topics, namely sexual assault, rape culture, and particularly how those two things pertain to campus rape. And, you know, we treat the subject matter seriously, but let's face it, you know if you want to hear us talk about that for an extended period of time, and if you don't, then there are time codes in the description for when we stop talking about that and start talking about the delightful 2010 Finnish Christmas horror movie Rare Exports. So, yeah, listener discretion is advised on this one. But other than that, I hope you enjoy the episode. Hope you find our takes interesting. And of course, have a Merry Christmas. A jingle, 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 jingle. It's Christmas. Jingle, 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 jingle. Is that Santa? Jingle, 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 jingle. Do I hear the pitter-patter of Rudolph's tiny hooves? Hi, it's Christmas, as you can tell from that festive intro. You can also tell from that festive intro that we've started drinking early doors.
We have indeed, yes. I'm on my third glass of wine? Question mark?
I'm on an undisclosed tinny.
And undisclosed. Oh, yeah, we haven't got the rights to say the name, have we?
And also, I'm just the number of tinnies is undisclosed.
Yeah, well, I'm on bottle one of my wine, so
redacted. Anyway, you're listening to the festive edition of what's this called? Kino Inferno.
Well done.
It's called Crimbo Inferno because it's fucking Christmas, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about two Christmas movies.
We are. However, we're not just going to be talking about any old Christmas movies, because we could have talked about shit like Home Alone or Die Hard or any of that kind of bollocks. But we thought it's probably... Or Elf.
Or
we could have talked about Elf.
The Snowman.
The Snowman.
That's Snowman.
No. But no, we thought we'd go for some slightly left field choices. So as you can tell, because you've read the name of the episode, we have chosen the 2019 iteration of Black Christmas, which was my choice, and Aidan, your choice was?
Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale.
Which we now have to refer to it solely as that, by the way. So, Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale.
So we've gone for two Christmas horror movies. Horror movies at Christmas? Who would have thought? But yeah. So you know, it's Christmas.
Get the bevs in.
This is another solid intro to this podcast.
I feel like our intros are a form of performance art that the world hasn't quite grasped yet.
I think it's like jazz. Some people really get it. Some people hate it with a burning passion. And I think, 90% of our audience are in the latter category.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
They're just like, please, can you just talk about the films? And we will talk about the films.
Right now, actually.
Yes.
Helena hasn't gotten home yet.
If I were missing, I'd want you to unleash the bloodhounds and track me down.
She was at DKO last night.
Still creating problems, all right?
Hello? Hello? I'm worried that something bad happened.
It's winter break. Could just be a delay of some sort. Snow.
My friend is missing.
9 times out of 10, the girl's just with a boyfriend.
For the second time in cinematic history, Bob Clark's classic of Yuletide fear, Black Christmas, was remade in 2019. Much like previous iterations, this film sees a group of sorority girls terrorised by a masked killer as the Christmas break approaches. Could the killer be closer to home than the girls first suspected, or could they be a symptom of a much wider issue?
Could the killer be coming from inside the house?
Ooh, spooky. And for anybody who hasn't seen the original Black Christmas, that was a reference. Anyway.
And a spoiler. That's how we do things on Kino Inferno. If you haven't seen the movie, fuck you.
That's our new slogan, actually.
Yeah, that's going to be the slogan for season 2.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, fuck you. You heard it here first, people, on Crimbo Inferno. And insert the sound of sleigh bells now.
A jingle, 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 jingle. Is that Frosty the Snowman? Is that Jack Frost nibbling at my nipples?
So, yeah, a little bit of preamble just before we get into talking about this movie.
Oh, yeah, sorry. We should stop being such pissheads for a second.
Nah, fuck that.
Okay.
If you're not drinking, fuck you. See, we're keeping that thing going.
Sure.
I hope the viewers are having a nice tipple with us whilst they listen to this episode. But, yes, the preamble. So, I think I may have mentioned this on an episode before, and if I haven't, here you go. This is now common knowledge for everybody. So, the original Black Christmas is my favourite horror film. Kind of has been for many years. So, when I heard that it was being remade in 2019, I was instantly like, okay, why? Because it was already remade in 2006. I low-key kind of like the 2006 remake. It's just gory, grotty nonsense, and if that's what you're in for a slasher movie, yeah, it's fantastic. Definitely, fill your boots on that one. 2019 rolls around, and so it was told that Blumhouse were going to be handling the remake. And Blumhouse, for better or for worse, they do make some pretty decent movies. They did the 2018 Halloween movie, which I'm...
you rolled the dice with the Blumhouse movie.
Yeah, let's put it this way. They've made some shite. They've made some absolute shite. I didn't see Fantasy Island. I hear that's the shitiest of shite.
Every single installment of the Paranormal Activity franchise. Okay, I will not be taking.
Oh my god, I forget that's Blumhouse, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I only saw the first one because that was bad enough, in my opinion, at least.
Don't at me. Don't at me. Those movies are bad.
So yeah, Blumhouse handled this remake of Black Christmas, and they did the 2018 Halloween movie, which I am kind of fond of. So I didn't think that Black Christmas was in bad hands, and then I saw the movie.
Oh baby.
So I'm gonna pass the reins over to you, Aidan, purely because I'd seen
this. Oh no! The reins of the reindeer.
A jingle, jingle, jingle.
Jingle, 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 jingle. Rudolph, no! I don't know what's happening there. I think Rudolph fell off the roof.
I think he did, yeah. We'll make sure he's okay, but first we need to talk about Black Christmas. He can...
Oh, he is not okay. He's dead.
He'll be fine.
Rudolph died.
So yeah, I had seen this movie prior to this episode, but I did watch it again for the purposes of this episode. So in typical Kino Inferno tradition...
I'm glad you chose to watch it again before we recorded a podcast on it.
I mean, I could have not and just winged it like some people that I know.
I've never done that. I've never ever done that. Apart from 20 minutes of Jurassic Park 3.
I was about to say, yes. Viewers, please refer back to the previous episode on good, bad sequels.
I did, look, I can admit this, I'm a man enough to admit this, fell asleep during Jurassic Park 3 for about 20 minutes, and then chose not to rewind. Chose not to rewind.
You truly are, alongside being the Wario of film criticism, you really are the maverick of it as well, aren't you?
Look, I've seen it before.
Yeah, that's
fair. I mean, I clearly, if anyone who's listened to that episode can attest, I clearly didn't remember it that well. Anyway... You're going to ask me what my opinion is on this movie.
Yes, because you hadn't seen it, I had, and there is many reasons why I chose to highlight it on this episode. So I, first of all, want to know what you thought about it.
Okay. I want to preface my remarks, Mark.
Oh, okay.
This is a preface.
Okay.
So, and yes, the listeners have been listening to the show long enough to know that this means I'm going to talk for like 30 uninterrupted
That's
minutes.
Fine. I've got a fresh glass of wine. You do what you need to do, baby. I'll be over here.
I mean, unfortunately, because we lost the Lady in the Water episode, listeners weren't treated to one of the truly longest Aidan rambles we've ever had about the career of M. Night Shyamalan. But watch the space. I might remake it. Anywho, so yes, Black Christmas 2019. So I should say I have seen the 1974 original. I've seen the 2006 remake, and I like both of them fine. I don't have the long history of being a big fan of these movies that Mark does, so the 29 remake to me is kind of a prior to watching it was kind of a non-entity. I had heard, I should say I like the 1974 movie, and the 2006 movie is fine, but like, you know what I mean, I wasn't hyped for it. I wasn't scandalized that they were remaking it. It was just a thing. I was intrigued because I heard a little bit of buzz around the movie about like it was dealing with some capital T themes. And this is why I kind of want to preface our discussion of this movie. And just kind of say, first of all, we've definitely had a content warning before the theme song, so we won't. I want to reiterate that now. This movie is we're gonna cover some topics that are, you know, triggering for some people, that are not fun to talk about for some people. That's totally fine. If you don't want to listen to that, skip forward like an hour or so, and we'll be talking about Finnish Santa Clauses running around with their dicks out.
I will also just say, if you check the episode description for this, there will be a timestamp for you to skip ahead if you don't want to hear about any of this, because we do understand that this is not going to be easy for some people to have to listen to.
Yeah, and also, like, you know, I can understand it might just be irritating for some people to listen to, you know, us being fairly glib about this movie, which, and I want to reiterate that as well, like, if we're being glib about this movie, we're not necessarily being glib about the subject matter.
No. It just so happens that this film happens to be glib about its subject matter too.
Yes, well, that was kind of tipping our hat a little bit earlier there. I think the thing is this. What I want to say is, movies are made about difficult subject matter, and this is one of those movies. If this movie, in any way, helped somebody who was going through a similar situation, that as the one depicted in this movie, maybe not the murderous cult element, but the sexual assault element and the kind of not being believed by the authority figures around you, if that in any way helped you get through it or made you feel seen or whatever, that is totally fine, and that more than justifies this movie being made. However, Mark and I are not assessing the movie from that perspective. We are assessing it from the perspective of how we felt about it as a film. Because don't get me wrong, there's plenty of films that I've seen that are not particularly good movies, but there's something in it that emotionally resonates with me. So I personally can't dismiss it entirely. However, I can divorce that very personal thing from the movie being good or bad in any way. You know, like, I think it's important to say that up front, because I don't want people to feel like we're just going. Because what I'm saying is, Mark, I didn't like this movie.
No, neither did I.
There are a number of reasons that I didn't like this movie, and we will expand on them at length. But I just want to make it abundantly clear that the reason that I didn't like this movie was not because it was dealing with feminist issues. That's perfectly fine in my opinion. You know, I don't think the fact that, like basically, like, I know that there is a subset of criticism of this movie that's like, women made a film, you know, that kind of shit. And it's like, if that's your vibe, if that's why you're listening to this, because you want to hear two men rip into a quote-unquote feminist movie, just go fuck yourself. Just literally go fuck yourself. Go away. Just fuck off and shut up. That is my opinion about that.
And I share that opinion right with you. If anybody just wants to hear two people bashing this movie because of its politics, no, go fuck yourself. We're not about that.
Because I think we're both fairly aligned in the fact that we think, like, you know, women should be allowed to make movies about whatever they want.
Absolutely, and they should be allowed to do it within whatever genre they want to do it in, particularly horror.
I'm laughing because, to be clear, listeners, I'm laughing because this shouldn't be a contentious thing.
No, it is kind of strange, isn't it, that we do have to have this as like a preface to talking about this movie, but so much of the criticism, just like general discussion of this movie, has always circled back to this.
And I also want to say, by the same token, it's okay not to like a movie. Even if the politics of the movie you think are trying to do something noble or something good, like, you're still allowed to not like that movie. Like, it's fine. Because sometimes we like movies that have dodgy political messages, for example, because, you know, they're aesthetically or they're entertaining. They're either aesthetically interesting or entertaining or whatever. And this is kind of what I'm driving towards. It's like this movie. So this is a remake of Black Christmas. It's trying to be this kind of feminist. And when I say it's trying to be, I want to be clear. I've looked into interviews by the director Sophia Takal, I hope I'm saying that right, and April Wolf, the screenwriter. They are like, they don't pull their punches about like, we were trying to make a feminist film. This movie is so hard to talk about because like I don't want to just be seen as like we're just tearing into the woman film.
No, and I completely understand that, because it does feel like discussing a movie like this, there is a certain sort of line that you do want to tread when discussing it, especially when, we are two white males, discussing this entirely sort of female-centric movie. But the way that I would say it is, because we've already said that neither of us really liked this movie. I think in
fact, I was quite put off by this movie in general.
Yeah, it is quite an off-putting movie, but not because of the sort of politics that are at the core of it. It's more the way that those politics are put across, I think.
Yeah, I would say, to me, it's more an issue of execution. Like, I see kind of what they were going for in some regards. I think the way that they put it across was very wrong-headed for my
Yeah, my biggest complaint about this movie... Well, I have two very big complaints, but my first big complaint really is that it kind of lacks any sense of subtlety or nuance in how it's trying to get across this sort of female empowerment feminist message, because it just, to me, seems like the way that they go about it is by throwing out buzz phrases and just constantly sort of beating you round the head with words like feminism, patriarchy, and stuff like this.
Yeah, this is a movie where the main girls who work at the sorority, they work at the sorority. They live at the sorority. They are, I mean, the Netflix description of this movie describes them as socially conscious, right? And like almost every conversation they have is about some kind of quote unquote woke cause, right? And I'm not going to be using that word too much because it annoys me.
Yeah.
But and it gets misused all the time. But like, these are characters whose primary function in the narrative is to act as mouthpieces about political issues, and that applies to every character in this film.
Yes.
And that's something. I'm not necessarily saying that you can't make interesting drama out of that. It's just kind of, I don't know if you felt this, but watching this movie I was kind of like, I don't know why this is a Black Christmas remake.
I
don't know why.
Yeah, that's one of the
we're not just
fundamental issues of it. Is that it is saying that it's another remake of Black Christmas, but it really has genuinely fuck all to do with the original movie.
And the slasher elements are so rote and so, it's just such a non-entity. Like there's no, like this. I should say this movie was a PG-13 in the States. So it's a 15 here, weirdly. Which
I think that's just
normally
themes.
It's the other way around.
I think that's just themes. I think that might be because obviously it does tackle themes such as sexual assault and.
I should have looked into the BBFC rating actually, because they normally give their reasons for.
I imagine it's due to the fact that they do quite openly talk about sexual assault, and there are also very sort of blink and you'll miss it, but there are flashbacks to the rape of the main character. That is something that you do see.
Yeah.
It's not graphic in any way, but it's there.
But yeah, it's clear what's happening.
Yeah, and they talk about it enough that whenever you do see a flashback to it, you know exactly what's happening.
So we should set the table a little bit. So we have our main character, Riley.
Yes.
Who is played by Imogen Poots, who I do want to throw out is a great actress. Is good in this movie as well. I think she's probably the best actor, arguably apart from Gary Elwes, who's in this movie as well. I don't think he's given a whole heap to do, to be honest.
No, but it's Cary Elwes, and he's charming no matter what he does. So he's a kind of nice bit of levity in this movie, I think.
So we have Riley and a bunch of her sorority sisters. Now, sorority is this weird thing they do in the States, right, where like they have the fraternities on university campuses. You have fraternities which are all male, and sororities which are all female, and they kind of dorm together, right? It's a whole thing. I don't know if every university does it in the States.
No, it's only really, from what I gather, it's only, or as they say in the States, colleges. It's only colleges that do the Greek system, from what I gather. I mean, I might be completely wrong in that.
Yeah, because they're always called, like, Alpha, Kappa,
Yeah, I mean, I immediately, because my brain is just so fucking hardwired to slasher movies, I immediately thought Omega Bega Zeta, which is from Scream 2.
It's a weird American thing. I mean, this whole movie's a weird American thing.
It absolutely is. So if we go to the very start of the movie, we sort of go through the beats of the film, as it were, like we usually do. So the very start of the movie is a bunch of sorority girls are all sort of just having a bit of a good time, and one of them is going to leave for the evening. So she leaves and she begins to walk home, and
this scene that you're about to describe is probably the most effective scene in the movie for me.
Yes, I would agree, apart from one other scene, two other scenes maybe, actually. There are a couple of moments in this movie that do work for me, but it's the rest of the film is so poorly thought out and executed that they're not really going to elevate the material for me personally.
Yeah. Sorry, so this scene you were about to say, and I'm just going to talk over you, is so she's walking home, and yes, a guy starts to walk behind her. It's that classic situation where she doesn't know whether he's following her or just happens to be walking behind her, and she starts to get these creepy texts
from a bust,
and
may we point out?
Yes, from the bust of Hawthorne, Calvin Hawthorne, who is the university's founder, and may or may not be a misogynist cultist. We'll get there.
Spoilers, yes, he is.
Yeah, I mean, I think they gathered from the fact I mentioned it. Yes. I don't say that about every character who appears. So anyway, yeah, so she's being followed by this guy, and she's getting these weird texts from the bust of Calvin Hawthorne, and the guy's on his phone behind her, and so it does actually generate quite a sense of paranoia. This scene of like, and it never, correct me if I'm wrong, it never entirely solves whether he was in on it or not.
No, it doesn't, and I think it's why it's one of the few horror scenes, and there are very few horror scenes in this horror movie, may I point out. It's barely a horror. Which is one of my main criticisms of the movie, which we'll get more into as we discuss it. But it never really does give you an explanation as to whether or not he was or wasn't in on it. And I think it is one of the...
Because the masked killer jumps out at her from another
a later point.
And kills her.
But as much as I do actually kind of like this scene, and I think it sets the tone for the movie, sadly the rest of the movie doesn't follow that tone. And what I think that this scene does quite well is that she's walking down the street at night, and it's pretty well lit as well, but she still has that sense of danger, like most women would walking down any kind of empty street.
I think we've all had that, but yeah, especially women. Like I think we've all had that thing, especially if you're late at night and it's some guy or some person, and it's just like, they're following you from like maybe a couple of meters away. I think we all have that element of like, is that person following me, or are they just going the same way as me? But obviously, it's amplified for women.
Of course, and she even goes to the length of getting her keys out of her bag and putting her keys in her fist, which is apparently not what you're supposed to do. That's actually advised against. But again, I like that detail was in there, because that is something that I guess a lot of people can find really quite relatable. And then because this is a slasher movie, or barely a slasher movie, she ends up running afoul of a mass killer who stabs her to death with an icicle?
Yes. She gets stabbed to death with an icicle, and then as her body's being dragged away, she makes a snow angel in the snow. Which sets the tone for a very different kind of movie to what this is.
Yeah, to me that says goofy, self-aware slasher movie.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, this is the thing. That opening scene, I think, is what they're trying to do with the rest of the movie and failing. Because there's this element of... There's a genuine horror. It's speaking to this idea of, like, as I said, women kind of existing in a world surrounded by men and not knowing which men are going to do them harm and which ones aren't. Which is like, it's a real fear. And, like, as much as people kind of want to be like... Because I know one of the criticisms of this movie is, all the male characters are one-dimensional. Which is true. But I kind of think, like, if this movie was actually delving into the idea of, like, this is what it feels like to be surrounded by men, especially if you're already, a survivor of sexual abuse, and to be surrounded by people who could do you harm, or if they're not going to do you harm, they may be complicit in it. Like, if it delved into that a bit more, rather than what it does do, which we will touch on later, is kind of, do you know what I mean? It's kind of, I'd almost find it more forgivable that the men were cartoonish, because if it was kind of grounding you in Imogen in Riley's mindset and making it clear that like this is the mindset of someone who's always on alert, who's always like, you know, who's had that happen to them, so now it's a possibility it could happen again in a very visceral way. But this movie isn't really interested in that visceral sense of horror, and everything kind of feels very surface level after that first scene. Because I think that first scene, and it's not even Riley in the first scene, it's just some random woman, well, not a random woman, but one of the sorority sisters who you don't see again, obviously, because she's being killed. But that first scene, I think, kind of has a nice balance between that very visceral sense of, like, because I'll be honest, I'd heard this movie was bad. And when I saw the opening scene, I was kind of like, okay, this is interesting. Like, there's something going on here. There's this kind of balance between this kind of very campy tone and this very stark real-world horror of like, oh, I'm being followed by a man in the dark. And it almost felt like it had this satirical element to it because obviously the scene ends in such a ridiculous way where it's like she gets stabbed with an icicle and then her corpse makes a snow angel in the snow. Like, it kind of ends in this very heightened way. So I was kind of like, is this what this movie's going to be? Like, it's going to have this kind of biting satirical element to it where it's kind of showing you like, okay, this is a slasher movie, but the real horror is that thing of we're walking down the street at night, there's a guy following you, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's such a shame, isn't it? Because that opening scene is probably the best scene in the entire movie. And even then, I think it has some kind of drawbacks as well. But everything that follows...
But it's an intriguing setup that it could have built on.
Yeah. I mean, it's relatively bloodless, which is fine.
Well,
this movie was a PG-13. Yeah, which is fine. And I know that the writer and director's intention was, with going for a PG-13 rating, they wanted younger audiences to see it. And I think, you know, due to the kind of issues and themes that it's talking about, that might be the best way of going about it. But that does come at the detriment to the film, in the sense that it can't really fully act on it being a horror movie. And that doesn't mean it has to have blood and guts, because it doesn't need to have blood and guts. It needs a sense of suspense and a sense of stakes.
Practically every kill after this is cut away from.
It is, and it's always done with a jump scare as well. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
All of the scenes have jump scares, and not very good jump scares, might I point out. Very predictable, very easy to see jump scares. Ones that don't feel earned in any sense.
I don't think Sofia Takal is a very good horror director, I think is what it comes down to. Like, a lot of the scenes have zero tension. Like, even as you're watching this masked character, like these masked figures. First of all, the mask design is fucking terrible in this movie.
The look of the killer is terrible. Like, it's not scary or intimidating in any way at all.
It's literally like a Halloween costume. It looks terrible. But and you know, I'm sure if we had her here, she would say, you know, Takal would say, that's the point, blah blah blah. But like, this movie, it feels like a lot of half-formed ideas. And that's most evident in the horror scenes to me, because it's like, so you have some stuff that could be kind of fun, like there's one girl who gets garroted by like the
Christmas lights.
Christmas
yeah,
lights
the Christmas
at one
lights.
point, yeah. Okay, you know, you're playing into the whole it's Black Christmas kind of vibe, but then the rest of the movie is just not. It's not interested in the Christmas element. It's not interested in the horror element. It's interested in being this story about like rape survival. But even then, it's not really a story about rape survival. It's a story about kind of what I want to call hashtag politics. It's about kind of, because these people, okay, we should get back into summarising the movie, because we're kind of drifting slightly, but like, so from that first scene, we then cut to our protagonist Riley and her friends in their sorority house, and we learned that some of them are going home for Christmas break, some of them are staying here, the quote-unquote orphans club. And it's at this point that we learn that Riley is a literal orphan, her parents are dead, and it's never brought up again.
No, yeah, that's just one of those, they just go, character trait, and just move on.
And it's like, okay, how does her being an orphan affect her also being a rape survivor? Kind of interesting. This person might have like a pretty bleak worldview because of that. Doesn't really come up again.
No.
Just kind of comes up as like, you know, it's incidental to her character. Because what they really want to hit you over the head with this Riley character is like, this Riley character got raped. And now she's sad.
That is very much, and again, this is something that I want to sort of tread carefully in saying, but that is very much her entire character, aside from the fact that compared to all of the other characters in the movie, who are very, very one-dimensional, I have to say, the rest of the characters in this movie, and that's including the male characters as well. I'm just gonna make that abundantly clear. They're all very one-dimensional. She's the only character that displays a sense of humor or any kind
she
of
tells the odd joke.
Yeah, even like in the face of danger and darkness and gloom and horrible shit, she still has this kind of very human sense of humor, which makes her the only character in the movie that you can actually root for, because everybody else is so wooden.
But again, this is an element that's so lightly touched on. Like, it could actually be kind of interesting to have this character be someone who's dealing with what's happened to them with humor. This is a very, very, very common thing for trauma survivors to do, especially survivors of trauma like, sexual assault, or in situations where people just haven't listened to them about their sexual assault and stuff like that. People use humor as a mechanism every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, this is something that could have been really interesting, because you have this stuff where, so Riley lives with the wokest sorority sisters it's possible to live with.
Yes.
they're all obsessed with social politics in one way or another. And again, I thought this movie was maybe going to make a critique of that or make some kind of point about that, but it's like, I think this movie just thinks that that's what college students are like. They just sit around always talking about identity politics at all times. And it's like, look, don't get me wrong, that's a massive part of being a university student, but like, it's not the only part. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's other stuff that goes on at that age. So we're introduced to her close friend Chris, who is an activist. She is the one who's had Calvin Hawthorne's bust removed because he was a slave owner, as well as we later find out, among other sins. Now this is an interesting point that I want to just kind of stop the podcast dead to make.
Go for it.
So the character of Chris is one of the few women of colour we have in this movie. The other one is the character who I think's name is Helena, I guess they'd say in America.
I would like to just point out that it's very difficult for us to go back to discuss the plot of this movie, not only because, well, there is only really one reason. It's because if you go on Wikipedia, it has no plot section. Yeah, it literally has no plot section.
Yeah, and it's tempting to say this movie just has no plot, really. Like,
and its characters are genuinely quite interchangeable. Like, you could swap all of them around, apart from Riley, because she is obviously the protagonist. You could kind of swap all these characters around. It wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to the story.
But yeah, so what I was saying about Chris is this. She's an activist, and she's a very militant activist. She's the one who got Calvin Hawthorne's bust removed, and she's trying to get this teacher, this Carrie Always character, removed from his position because he is a misogynist, according to her. And according to the movie, to be fair. He does turn out to be
not only just a misogynist, but what they say is that on the course that he teaches,
there are no female authors, nor are there any authors of colour.
Yes. And the movie almost threatens to have an interesting dynamic when one of the other sorority sisters is like, but what are we supposed to do? Not study the classics? It's a classics course.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that gets brought up in conversation, and okay, this is something actually kind of interesting, and then it just gets dropped immediately, and they just have no further discussion on it.
Because this movie isn't really interested in discussion, it's interested in gesturing towards discussion. And like, look, I want to be abundantly clear, I'm not asking for a movie to cover the whole gamut of social oppression in one go. But kind of, let's delve into it with a little more depth. It's kind of my point.
I would say that's generally one of my biggest criticisms of the movie, is that it's all so surface level, and it's all intention, no actual follow through with its ideas.
Okay, because this ties into what I wanted to say, right, about Chris. So she's one of our few sorority sisters of colour who's focused on anyway, and she's kind of like maybe the second lead or third lead of the movie. She's good friends with Riley, and they have a complex dynamic involving Riley's sexual assault, where Chris is constantly trying to get her to like fight back against the system. You've got to fight the oppression. And Riley's main thing is like, no, I don't really want to. I'm dealing with my own shit. Which again, it threatens to be an interesting dynamic. But what I will say is this. I think it's so interesting that of the two girls of colour that we have who are main characters with lines, one of them is a pushy social activist who annoys all of her friends, and who Riley calls out as a pushy and says, you don't respect my boundaries. And the other, well, we'll get there, but it turns out to be...
Yeah, because that is a That is a hell of a point, and I have to agree with
Yes.
it entirely. Like, because it was something that definitely stood out to me. But until you mentioned this to me, because we had a little discussion of things pre-recording, another little peek behind the curtain. Eventually, you'll see our knobs. But no, that was something that you did mention to me, and then it was as soon as you mentioned it, it really kind of became a point of contention for me in this movie because I hadn't quite
and
put
it's
two
like,
and two together.
and look, normally I don't sit there assessing the racial dynamics of the movies, the cast of movies, but this movie, it's trying to be so like, look at us, we're so fucking woke and we're making this point and all this, but then it falls down in ways like that, and also one of the few men in this movie who's not totally evil. Because men kind of fall into two categories in this movie: evil or incompetent, and that's fine. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not here going like, oh, you should have well-rounded male characters in this female revenge movie or this female kind of empowerment movie. Because like, it's not the point of the movie. I don't mind that the men take a backseat and are generally a bit cookie cutter. However, they include this one guy, and again, this is a person of color in this role, a man of color, and his introduction is. He's staring at a white woman and making her uncomfortable. And you kind of go, guys, what are we doing? Like, what, you're coming over here making this movie trying to be like, and the thing that kind of bothers me about this is I have seen a lot of interviews because I wanted to get I hunted out into print interviews and a podcast interview with April Wolf and Sophia Takal to kind of get into their mindset. So I want to give everything a fair shake, even if I didn't like it.
No, of course.
I kind of want to be like, especially if we're covering it for the podcast, because like, I want people who like the movie to be able to listen to our assessment and be like, they made some fair points, even if I disagree with them on the whole. So, I want to be abundantly clear about this. They wanted to make a movie that was going to shake up the audience. That was the point. They described their movie as an angry feminist movie.
And I think there is definitely a reading
Yes.
of that is completely applicable. Again, just due to the way that they bombard you with so much of this stuff. Like, you could absolutely read this movie that way.
But I also think there's this condescension from these 30-something middle-class white filmmakers that kind of like, it riles me up a little bit. There is this element of like, and I should say for the benefit of people who don't know, is we are both white, so take this as you will. But there is this element of like, okay, you're talking about female empowerment, but you're falling down in this way about racial dynamics. Like, you're not even thinking about that. Like, I've not seen a single interview where they've spoken about that. And you could say, well, that's not the point of the movie. And, to a degree, you're right. But I think in this movie where you're explicitly showing one character to be like a Black Lives Matter activist, and she's talking about, removing the statues of slave owners and things like that. Because that is the reason that she's removed Calvin Hawthorne's bust, or why she's so offended by it, because he was a slave owner. That's what they say in the movie.
And that is also, to not only go back to the plot slightly, that is kind of the event that really kickstarts what happens.
Yeah, it's kind of the inciting incident. But this is it. I don't think you can really... It's difficult to express what I mean, but it's kind of like you're paying lip service to these racial elements, but then also every person of colour in your movie is antagonistic in some way. And like, I know, like, without meaning to get to the end of the movie, like, Chris comes good in the end and saves the day. But then that becomes interesting, because then it's saying like, okay, so there's a scene. We'll kind of get back to the linear plot in a minute, but I want to finish this point. There's a scene where Chris is saying to Riley, like, you've got to fight back. You can't disappear into the background anymore. And Riley kind of calls her out, saying like, you're being pushy. Like, this isn't your thing. Like, you're turning everything into a social cause, which is perfectly fine. But at the end of the movie, is Riley going, "Oh, you were right all along. I should have fought back. I should have fought more. I should have been fighting this whole time." And it's like, okay, so what are we saying? Are we saying that victims who don't want to take on the entire system, who do deal with it in a personal way rather than in a
are we saying they're wrong? Because that's very much what this movie is implying.
And I heard an interview with them where April Wolf was saying, "Oh, people think that what Chris says is our opinion, but that's clearly not the case." And I want to just be like, April, have you seen your movie? This movie ends with the main character saying, "You were right all along," and there is nothing in the movie that dispels that. the movie seems to be saying, yes, you should take up arms and fight. Now, that's one thing. If that is the opinion of the movie, fair enough. If that's the argument that the movie is making, fair enough. But it's this mealy-mouthed thing of, like, people got upset with them about that element of the film. Quite rightly so. And their response is just to be like, oh, well, that's not what we meant. I was like, well, okay, but that's what you said.
It's this huge deflection, isn't it? Like, it's especially when it's very much there. It's not even subtext in this movie. It's text.
I mean, I've also heard an interview with her where she said that... actually, it was the same interview. Where she said, and I quote, people don't like this movie because I guess people just don't like women. And I want to be like...
See, that I find infuriating on such a level where I'm like, okay, so because this movie, the way that it puts across its politics is not how I personally would want to engage with that subject, I hate the assertion that by the author, therefore, I'm a misogynist because I don't engage with the material how they've intended it.
Because let me make something abundantly clear to anyone listening to this. If this was a movie about this subject matter, about these themes... And it was good, then I'd be all for that. You know I would. And it's that thing of like, I want to see this movie that they think they've made. It's not what they did make. And we can get into... And like, there are some reasons why. There are some mitigating factors. Like, this movie was made in a very short space of time.
27 days to be precise. 27 days. Yes, like barely 4 weeks of production.
And like the script was written within like a couple of months, I think I read somewhere. So it's kind of... I'm not going to be... Well, you know, I wouldn't be too harsh on them for like not having a fully formed point.
I would say, obviously, because we've gone in... Well, mostly you've gone in on this movie. And I think you've... But, however, you've expressed a lot of things about this film, and particularly the way in which it puts across its ideas and such, that I completely agree with. And... because obviously we now know that the production cycle of this movie was very short, and like the script was... What did you say? How long did it take them to write the script?
Maybe 2 or 3 months, I think.
Well, I mean, even then, for a script, that's insanely short. In retrospect, doesn't it kind of feel like they wrote the script with these kinds of ideas, and basically, we want to highlight this, we want to highlight this, we want to highlight this, and then they never got past the stage of developing the script further?
That's basically what I think it is.
Yeah.
Like, and like again, like I've said in this podcast already, like there's no reason why this movie couldn't have worked. And this is a thing where it's like, I don't want people to listen to this and think we don't like this movie because it's a woman movie or it's a feminist movie.
No, not at all. Because there are particularly within the horror genre, there are plenty of movies that I would describe as being feminist or empowering of women, and this movie is not that.
I also want to throw out there, like, I went in on April a minute ago. She used to have a podcast called Switchblade Sisters, which I enjoy very much. She knows her shit about horror movies. This is not a thing of me going, oh, you don't get horror movies, dumb bitch. Like, it's not that either. And I think actually what's good about this is that we've, mostly me, ranted about this movie, and not once have we been like, oh, it's because it's women versus men. Oh, it's trying to be divisive, and that's why it's bad.
Well, no, because so much of the horror genre is kind of women versus men. It's very much, that's been a trope since the original Black Christmas. Since Psycho, that's very much kind of been the thing.
I wish this movie made me more conflicted, made me kind of like, challenged me in any way. And I think that's kind of the point. It's like, and actually, I'm going to refer to a movie which I do have deeply mixed feelings about, but which I think is arguably a better movie about than this, Promising Young Woman, Emerald Fennell's
which
debut film.
I know that me and you have very conflicting feelings on, because I personally really quite loved Promising Young Woman.
I don't think I could say I loved it, but I think I appreciated it for what it was, with a few reservations. Interestingly, some of the things that I would mention about this film, I would apply to that film, but This isn't a podcast about Promising Young Woman.
No.
This is a podcast, but I'm just kind of saying, like, there's clearly this thing in the zeitgeist where people want this kind of kitschy, kind of grindhousey, kind of pulpy movie that's going to deal with these very serious themes. And I appreciate that. I understand that. I think that's... I totally get where that's coming from. I think a lot of horror fans are women, and I think they want to see these movies that are like talking to them about their experience. And I should say, I watched most of the movies I watched for this podcast, I watched with my partner, kind of dipping in and out of the room. She thought this movie was a big pile of dog shit, and she really liked Promising Young Woman, or at least she kind of vibed with it, you know. Thought it was interesting, and I should say, like, I thought that movie was very interesting, regardless of some of the things that I thought maybe were to its detriment. It has some very compelling stuff in it, like, and I think having seen this movie, I'm kind of like, I appreciate that movie more. I still have some massive reservations, and maybe we'll cover.
I think this is probably the point where we can definitely, like, properly delve back into Black Christmas, because we obviously have gone on this, mostly you, have gone on this huge sort of divergent thing. But I think it's really important to talk about with this kind of movie, especially a movie that has made its mission.
The thing is, right, and I like, if anyone who's seen this movie, you can't talk about this movie without talking about this stuff.
Yeah, the politics of the movie are so intrinsic to the movie itself, so you can't avoid talking about them. And I kind of regret that I've not been able to chime in as much, but you very much hit the nail on the head of how I feel about this film.
Sorry, I think ever since I watched this movie, I've been stewing in my mind about what I wanted to say about it. I hope that it's been coherent.
I've had a couple of glasses of wine, so what do I know?
Ah, yes, the Kino Inferno episode where we get drunk and rant about feminist films. That's what we are now.
But no, I have to agree. Like, again, I first saw this movie. I watched it last year. Actually, it was probably around a year ago that I saw it. It was on Sky. I was like, do you know what? I'm going to give this 2019 version of Black Christmas a go, and I fucking hated it. I absolutely hated it. Not only because A, it's not Black Christmas. It has nothing to do with Black Christmas. B, and this is the point that I wanted to get into discussing the most.
Yeah, I really want to. Sorry, I will let you speak at some point in this podcast. But
that's fine.
I agree. I want to hammer that point home. One of the main things I had with this movie is, like, why is it a Black Christmas remake? Because A, the slasher elements are boring, and it seems like the director herself is bored by them. And, like, don't get me wrong, I know April Wolf is a big horror person, so I know that she pushed for more horror stuff in the movie. But the direction of the movie, the horror scenes are just bland and boring with no tension. So it's kind of like, why is it a slasher movie to begin with?
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely one of my biggest points of contention. My other biggest point is, like we've just discussed at length, is that it clearly wants to have this message where it's talking about things like rape culture, sexual assault survivors, feminism, patriarchy, especially patriarchy, which is the third act of the movie. It really wants to talk about that. And it's just the fact that, for me, for a film to talk about those kinds of ideas, it needs to deliver it in some way that is subtle. And, well, not even subtle, really. You can.
Well, it doesn't have to be subtle.
No, yeah.
It doesn't have to be subtle.
Yeah, I will take back that point and say, like...
You take that back, sir.
I will take it back. But it needs at least a sense of nuance. It just doesn't need to be people saying, like, words like feminism, patriarchy, buzzwords like not all men.
Right. Can I just throw out that I knew what this kind of movie this was going to be, because after that initial murder scene we discussed, the next scene you see is Riley's sorority sister.
This is in
Franny,
my notes. This is in my notes.
Bursting into the room and being like, "Where's my? Is it Diva Cup or Moon Cup?"
She says Diva Cup because I believe in America that's what they call them. But can we also acknowledge that in that same scene when she asked for her Diva Cup, and if you don't know what a Diva Cup is, look it up. Environmentally friendly, game changer.
Oh yeah, trust me. Like, I want to throw out there: buy Diva Cups, buy Moon Cups. It's a game changer.
It is a game changer. Obviously, as two people who do not suffer from menses, when I was first told about this, I was like, that is a game changer. Yeah.
Look, I've lived with many people who do suffer from menses. I've lived with many. In fact, I've in every house I've lived in, there's been at least one woman. Admittedly, one of them was my mother, and we did not discuss her periodic habits. But I lived with women in uni. I live with a woman now. You know, Moon Cups are the thing.
But yeah, and they're dishwasher friendly apparently. So why wouldn't you buy one?
They're dishwasher friendly. They're reusable. They're environmentally sustainable. It's just the way forward, you know? It's safer than a tampon as well. There's less risk of toxic shock.
I also just want to point out that in no way is Kino Inferno endorsed by the Moon Cup people.
No, we're just telling you this. we just want you to know.
Going back to the point before we just, inadvertently...
Well, because actually, that perfectly... I mean, if they want to give us money...
I will take the Moon Cup.
But that perfectly underscores my point about the Diva Cup line, because it's this line where it's supposed to be, and I've heard them on this interview say that, like, that line kind of separates the men from the boys kind of thing, because people are either going, oh, shocked, appalled, or they're like, yeah, they mentioned that women have periods. And I'll be honest, me and my partner, when we both heard that line, just kind of went, okay. Like, you know, it's that thing of like, look, we know women have periods. We don't have a problem with it because we're fucking adults. Like, what is this?
And we do have to discuss the fact that apart from that one guy who is portrayed to be the nice guy, who is also the only man of colour in the movie, I believe.
Yes, and even then, he's kind of a creep.
And even then, like, the traits they ascribe to him is that he's kind of quiet, doesn't have any kind of masculine traits, even though that's obviously not a problem, but, like, you know, he's portrayed as being very kind of, like, placid and non-confrontational, and also doesn't use social media. That's a big thing that they highlight about his character. Like, that's how they discover that he can't possibly be the person sending the text messages.
I thought that was weird, because I thought that was a red herring.
Especially when social media is not utilized at all throughout the movie. It's just text messages.
Well, they get DMs. They say it's DMs.
Yeah.
Because there's the bit where she talks to the security guard and she's like, DMs.
Yes, the security guard who only eats ham sandwiches with mayonnaise. Yeah, which is, again, is
with
another, like, weird...
aggressive amounts of mayonnaise.
Yeah. And then that also felt like a weird, like, defining character trait, that he just will eat ham with mayonnaise. I was like, what was the point of that? Like, what are you trying to say with that?
If anything.
Yeah, if anything. Is it just like a weird thing that you're putting across, or are you trying to say something about the security guard? Like,
do you know what? I'm going to throw something. I'm going to throw something right out there. I'm going to throw it at you. I'm going to throw it directly to you.
Right, let me get my gloves on. Gloves are
It's
on.
a hot potato.
Gloves are on.
It's a hot potato. It's coming right at you.
Right, I got my hands
The hot
up.
potato is this. There's a lot of people out there who have seen Jordan Peele's Get Out, and they try to make their own version, and they don't get what made Get Out good. Catch the potato.
Caught it. Got it.
Because the thing is, Get Out...
I thought I was supposed to make my point. Is that the point of catching the potato?
No, it's to distract you while I talk more.
Oh, okay. Well, we could have already gone through that.
No, okay, you've caught the potato, make your point.
Well, I was just going to say, like, yeah, a lot of people definitely did see Get Out, and Get Out is not...
Because that has stuff like that, where it's like little details of characters that's supposed to be symbolic, and yeah.
Well, Get Out isn't the first socially conscious horror movie. There have been countless films before it that have been socially conscious.
I think it's massively influential on the modern crop.
And also, do you know what I think the thing is that despite the fact that Jordan Peele is very switched on and is a very, very deeply intelligent man, Get Out still has a sense of humour.
Yeah, and actually works as a horror movie.
Yeah,
it uses the genre trappings to convey the emotional point that it's trying to make.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing about Black Christmas that really falls flat for me. And again, this is where we can definitely talk about the plot as well. Because ultimately, when you boil Black Christmas 2019 down, when you get past the messages of the movie and stuff, it is supposed to be a slasher movie. And it completely falls flat on its face in being a slasher movie. Well, it falls flat being a horror movie because, like you say, it's like they're not interested in making a horror film. They're interested in making a piece of like social commentary, I guess. And so therefore the horror scenes feel completely secondary to everything else that happens. So I
mean, the direction of this movie is very flat.
Well, it's flat as a witch's tit. Yeah. I'll say that with all certainty. Like, it's such flat direction. Like, the cinematography of this film is really unremarkable.
Yeah, it's not terrible, but it's just there.
Yeah. We probably should go back into the plot, otherwise we've just gone on these like nonsensical ramblings for like a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Let's round up the plot. Mark, you know what? You talk for a bit. I'm just going to continue to drink and try not to interrupt.
Right, okay, so after the original murder with the Snow Angel happens, which is kind of low-key great, low-key kind of bullshit.
Low-key? He's not in this.
Well, I mean, this would be a worse film if he was. Controversial.
I don't know.
Anyway, so, yeah, the sorority sisters, they start getting text messages from Calvin Hawthorne, and who his fucking picture is the bust of Calvin Hawthorne. Who, like we previously discussed, was the founder of the university and is like revered by the fraternity houses. And so, yeah, the girls start getting these text messages from him, apparently. And then one by one, they start getting killed. Which is me bypassing at least 40 minutes of this movie. Because that's kind of all it is. It's just Riley, who played by Imogen Poots, who we do have to point out is the saving grace of this movie.
Yeah, I wanted to. We've said she's a good actor already,
but she really is great in this movie, and that's just with the caveat that the rest of the movie is kind of dire, and therefore
she is making the best of a bad job. Really, she conveys the kind of emotions that she's asked to convey really well, I would say.
Yeah, and she does a really good job of it. And Riley is the only character in this movie that I care if she lives or dies.
You could stop there. Riley's the only character in this movie. Everyone else is just a placeholder.
The only significant event that happens is when Riley and her friends go to the fraternity house for a talent show, and her sorority sisters are going to perform a Christmas song for the talent show. And I can see Aiden already shaking his head, but to me, this is one of the only good scenes in the movie.
It's so contrived.
It is so contrived, but also it's one of the few moments of joy in the movie, I think.
And look, don't get me wrong, if this movie was committing to the more campy, kitschy tone at all times, the contrived nature of the scene would be fine.
Yes.
But it's the fact that it goes from that to being, within the space of this scene, it goes from this, clearly a Mean Girls nod, where they're all kind of wearing the sexy Santa outfits and they're doing this little song, and it turns into a song about, rape, basically.
Well, about Riley being raped, yes, that's what they turn into a song about.
Because it's the fraternity house where it happened, and also her rapist is in the audience, right? So tense, right? But the thing is, you're combining this scene where it's clearly this kind of little cheeky satirical nod to the scene from Mean Girls, but it's also giving us these close-ups of Imogen Poots mentally reliving her rape, and it's kind of these things don't go together. This isn't peanut butter and chocolate, two great tastes together. It doesn't work. You can either have it be this harrowing, visceral experience, or you can have it be this cheeky, satirical thing with a bit of bite to it, but not both. I think that the existence of these two tones in one scene just kills it dead.
Well, I mean, we've obviously kind of gone around the houses a little bit, as we tend to do, but also just prior to this scene happening is a scene in which Riley, in said fraternity house, is searching for her drunk friend and sees her friend.
So this is Helena.
That
we mentioned earlier.
She sees Helena about to be essentially date raped by one of the fraternity.
Yeah, well, the guy's coming on pretty strong. And she's clearly
coming on strong. He literally gets a rubber out.
Well, I'm explaining the scene, Mark. He's coming on pretty strong. She's kind of oh, maybe not. And then he starts to get quite forceful, and she comes in and interrupts this scene. The guy says, "You bitches are all the same, you little teasers." And he fucks off. I really want to highlight this scene. I want to just draw a little circle around it. And then we'll kind of come back to it once you've finished with the plot.
I've not got much else to go on, trust me.
Okay, well, also in this same sequence, Riley stumbles across the fraternity brothers having their secret cult initiation, which, lads, don't do that on the same day as the talent show.
Yeah, literally. Let's
not double book the secret cult initiation. But we see that Carrie Always' character, the kind of Jordan Peterson-esque character, I guess. Well, that's kind of how he's introduced, right? Because he's a blowhard professor because the first scene he's reading this fucking diatribe about women aren't as good as men, lol. And then he asks Riley her opinion on it, and she's like, it seems like they're saying that women aren't as good as men. And he's like, why did you assume it was a male author? Lol, it was a woman. And it's kind of okay. It's kind of the thing where it's this could mean something if it was connected to any of the rest of the movie. You know what I mean? It's you could be talking about the complicity of certain women in this kind of stuff. You could be talking about all manner of stuff.
Which also,
but again,
the complicity of women is brought up later in the film. But to a really unimpactful end.
Yeah, so we should... Okay, to just breeze through the end of this movie.
Well, let me just breeze through the middle, because I can do that in 5 seconds.
Go. Well, hang on, we haven't said about the cult initiation. We see that the bust of Calvin Hawthorne is at the centre of this cult initiation. This Carrie Always is taking some black goo from the statue and daubing the new pledges' heads with it, claiming that it's a hazing ritual kind of thing, which I kind of want to flag up as a weird element because they say that they're pledges to the fraternity, but like it's December, so would they be taking on new pledges?
And it's also heavily implied that every single one of the fraternity house are under the influence of this.
Well, this is something that becomes increasingly unclear because. Summarize the middle of this movie.
Well, I mean, I can summarize the middle of this movie. Killer in mask attack women.
Correct.
That's the middle of this movie. Like literally, that's all that happens. Is that the girls that we have met, they get attacked various times by the hooded killer. We
do learn that the bust of Calvin Hawthorne emits a signal as well as a black.
But we find that out at the end. The thing that comes as a twist, and I say this doing,
scare quotes.
Yeah, the quotes, which you can't see, viewers, you can't see. But the twist is that they kill one of these killers. And they do it in a manner which is actually one thing I will praise about the movie, is I believe Imogen Poots' character, Riley, she
shanks him up.
She shanks him with a set of keys in her fist. And I was like, do you know what, that's not only a great callback to the first scene of the movie, but also a great reference to the fact that is something that like women have been told, don't do that when you're being pursued, but like, and she uses it as like a tool of power and she kills him. I'm like, that's kind of low-key great.
Again, more of that and we'd have a movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's so wasted on this movie. And also we then discover that doesn't kill him anyway, because he comes back.
And he's leaking black goo.
Which apparently is for the sake of the PG-13 rating. I just think it's also to facilitate the bollocks that we find out at the end.
Yes, because she goes, why isn't it blood?
Very dramatically, yeah. More dramatically than you gave it credit for, I guess. But
I mean, to be fair, Poots sells it.
She does. Like, she's a trooper. Whatever she got paid for this film was not enough.
I will say Poots is doing some good work in this movie because she's delivering dialogue like, why isn't it blood? Which I don't know how you do with a straight face. But, yeah, she is delivering that kind of shit and kind of owning it.
But no, I've summarised the midpoint of that movie as in women attacked by masked man. Like, that is literally all that happens in the midpoint.
And they prepare for a Christmas dinner.
Yeah, and even then, like, that's basically there just to justify the title of the movie. And then so when we move on in the story from there, though, we get the twist. The most obvious twist ever, because it's already been pre-established in the scene where we saw Calvin Hawthorne's like black goo being spread on pledges, is that there's more than one killer.
Fuck, really?
Because of course there is. Like, this movie wouldn't make sense if there was only one killer. And so
I kind of figured that from the opening scene.
Yeah,
but sure.
And yeah, because obviously, how can the killer be in two places at once? And
yes.
So they treat it like a twist because the characters treat it like it's a twist because apparently they're smart about everything else other than what's going on. And so we're then given this little aside, and I feel like you should be given more attention, where we see another sorority house being attacked by the mass killer.
Yeah, this is kind of like this is one of the okay scenes, I guess, where they call the campus security, as in our main heroes do. And then campus security, the guard that we saw applying far too much mayonnaise to his ham sandwich, kind of attempts to come to the rescue. And you see the scene of him like getting his gun ready, getting sorted out. And he bursts in on the other sorority. So it's kind of this thing of like, oh, it's happening across campus. Like, there's no escape. That's kind of a cool little moment. I mean, it's a blatant lift from Silence of the Lambs. But it's not the
only good scare scene in this movie. Not from Silence of the Lambs, may I point out, but the only good scare in this movie, is literally lifted from The Exorcist 3.
I mean, look, I'm not going to razz them too hard about ripping off the Silence of the Lambs bit because so many movies have done it at this point that you could just see it as a trope, you know. But again, this is the thing. Like that scene in Silence of the Lambs is never not scary.
Yeah,
where you realise that the SWAT team have gone to the wrong house, and she's gone to Buffalo Bill's house. Like that scene is tense whether you know what's coming or not. Like
because it's so expertly crafted around that idea. So,
and I just want to point out about that scene in Silence of the Lambs. When we watched that movie for our horror and fantasy course at Lincoln University, enroll today. We'd obviously seen the movie umpteen times, but there were people there who hadn't. And when they saw that scene, there was a genuine in the crowd. Like, you know, it's
because
like,
it's well constructed. It's well
still
put
works
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas this movie, you can't say that for it, because the bit where they reveal that one of the killers is not the only killer, it's followed up by one of them just walking into the room, like, unannounced, no ceremony, no flair. It just happens.
Yeah, okay. And then so the end of the movie is Riley. We're cutting a long story short, but Riley gets taken captive by the cult. They try to make her obedient,
which doesn't.
It turns out Helena, who, as you recall, is one of the only characters of color and was almost raped earlier, turns up and she's like, "I like the cult. Aren't you tired of not knowing your place, woman?"
And this is where, when I first saw the movie, I started to feel ill. I felt genuinely ill.
This scene, I don't know what the fuck anyone was thinking. And I want to kind of just go, sorry, you introduced this character, or not introduced, but like, one of the earlier scenes we see of this character is like, she's got a potentially abusive a definitely abusive boyfriend, who would have gone too far had Riley not intervened. And the next thing you're going to tell me about this character is she's in on the evil misogynist black goo cult.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. What the fuck is that about? Like,
and like, look, I don't mind them doing a thing of like, oh, there's, one of the girls is in on it because that's a nice little twist, I guess. But it kind of speaks to some women are actually complicit in this power structure. Like, some women are the kind of women who go, oh, I don't like feminists. I'm not like the other girls. You could do that. But maybe not with the character that you've just shown almost be the victim of a rape.
Yeah,
like
it feels like genuinely kind of insulting, I think.
Because there's also an element where Riley doesn't even bring that up. She doesn't even go like, "Are you fucking joking?" What I mean?
That's an issue for me, is that like Riley witnesses that almost happen earlier in the movie. Doesn't say anything to any of her other sisters, and this is another thing as well. Like, they keep referring to themselves as sisters and a sisterhood. They're really not forthcoming with one another about what's happening. Like, they don't confide in each other all that much, considering they give each other that label. And I find that really interesting, especially when Chris is giving Riley shit about not discussing when she got assaulted. I'm like, there's none of this.
It's crazy.
There's none of this in the sisterhood. Like, for a sisterhood, you do not fucking confide in one another whatsoever. And I don't believe in the sisterhood, which makes the ending of the movie feel completely unearned.
Yeah, it's really... it's very weird. I don't really... Again, it feels like a movie that was written too quickly. It was written in a hurry.
I've actually got in my notes here, it seems like the characters are reading the treatment and not the script.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. Especially that scene just before we get to discuss it, because we haven't really discussed the ending properly yet. There's the bit where they escape the house full of killers, and Chris and Riley are in the car, and Riley then goes on the biggest exposition dump since the Crimes of Grindelwald. Sorry, I'll take that back. The Crimes of Gay Wizard Hitler.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
Calling it by
the
its
correct
true name.
title, yes. So she goes on the biggest fucking exposition dump, where she talks about how she knows that they're controlled by Hawthorne, and she has to destroy the bust and all this shit, which is a massive leap of logic to anybody apart from the audience who has seen these telltale signs.
And also kind of deflates the whole point of, like, misogyny is everywhere.
That's where we're getting into my biggest problem with the film.
Because it turns around and goes, actually, the source of misogyny is a magical bust that leaks black oil. And again, it's this thing of, like, this could work if you thought through what, the symbolism of the movie, but you didn't. You just didn't.
You just didn't.
I mean, admittedly, you didn't have time from the sound of it, but... yeah, and, like, I've heard in interviews April Wolf talking about, like, oh, well, misogyny kind of feels like this ever-present cult, and, like, the patriarchy almost feels like there's this kind of, like, dark force that constantly resurrects itself.
But this film does not in any way portray that.
No, it literally goes... Because this is the thing. I thought... Because there's literally a scene earlier on... Well, there's a line earlier on where Carrie always says about, like, oh, a lot has been sacrificed to keep our college going and keep our traditions alive. Which to me, I was like, okay, so this is going to turn out to be like an ancient cult that's been going since the dawn of society.
Not at all.
It's like, no, at most, this cult has been going for a semester by the movie's logic. Because they say, last semester, you had the bust of Calvin Hawthorne removed.
And they found a scroll inside it or something.
Yes, because it's not until they had the bust removed that the cult came about. Which is another interesting thing, because it's like, so the black rights activist who you've set up as a pushy, annoying bitch, her actions directly caused the misogynist murder cult.
So what is this film trying to say then? Like,
Are you sure? Are you sure, movie? This is what you want to say.
And I feel like, well, wait, let's just quickly summarise the ending, because I feel like we've gone around the fucking houses. Like,
oh, it just fucking finishes. It just finishes.
Yeah, like, so basically, Riley gets...
Who fucking cares?
Riley gets taken capture by the cult, and they're trying to make her a good woman. They try to make her bow or some shit.
Well, they imply if she doesn't go along with them that they'll murder rape her, basically.
Essentially, yes. And so... Then at the very end, the rest of the sorority girls from the other sorority house, may I point out, not the characters that we have got to know, because the movie has unceremoniously killed them off for like no reason.
We haven't. Well, you say the characters we've got to know, the characters we've seen the most of.
That was some hyperbole on my part, I will admit.
Because I'll be honest, it took me a while to realise it was the girls from the other sorority house. Legit, I was like, oh wait, I thought most of these girls were dead, and then was like, oh wait, no, there's another sorority house. Like.
Yeah, they bust in, there's this huge moment, they fight the cult members, not very successfully for the most part. Only Riley is the one that really makes a difference. She, like, breaks the bust of Calvin Hawthorne.
And kills her rapist.
And she kills him as well, yeah, and again...
Which would be cathartic if all these men weren't identical.
Yeah, if they weren't just fucking cut and paste men are bad.
Because that's not even my point. They look identical. So, like, it took me a while to be like, oh, that's the guy from before, he's the rapist. Like, because they all look like exactly what you think they look like. These fucking Ivy League jock characters. And again, okay, I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to make it like, oh, it's this faceless horde, right? But, like, at the same time, I can't tell these characters apart. And I am white. So, you know, there's that problem of, if I can't tell these white men apart, you've got a problem on your hands.
Well, and I think now that we've got the awful ending, because yeah, they fight the cult off, the house burns down, the credits roll. That is literally how this movie ends.
Yeah, which again, it's like, is this an empowering ending, or is this a thing where they're going to get arrested for murder, manslaughter, all the rest of it?
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter because they killed the guys, so therefore that is the movie.
There's one more thing that I want to address about this movie before we wrap up. So one of the things we learn about the bust of Calvin Hawthorne is that it has this black goo, but it also has this like signal that it sends out that we're told by one of the cult members, quote, awakens your inner alpha.
I got it here. It says true alpha.
The true alpha.
Which is awful screenwriting.
Well, I mean, in a better movie, you would take it as like, I don't know. This is the problem with bad screenplays. Is like, it's hard to know what's intentional and what's not. Like, that line could be deliberately supposed to be like funny, but I think it's
just not delivered in that way. Like,
no.
It's not even like built up to be that way. It's just said as a matter of fact thing, and it just doesn't work.
Anyway, the point is this: one of the sorority girls has this boyfriend, Nate, who she calls Smoosh, and throughout most of the movie, he's a pretty amiable chap. He goes along with the girls when they're doing their sexy Santa rape call-out song. You know, he's just chilling, he's just vibing for the most part. But then when this signal gets released, he starts turning into a bit of a misogynist. Or at the very least, he starts arguing back about, like, you know, what did you girls expect from all this? Like, all the negative attention you're getting is because you did this performance in the first place. Now, the reason I wanted to highlight this character is because this is an example of the movie kind of almost doing something right and kind of funny and with some bite to it. Where because the signal awakens his true alpha, quote unquote, he kind of like rushes in to defend the girls from the killers at one point. He's like, no one messes with my girl! And then is promptly, unceremoniously killed off. Now, I again, I could have laughed at that quite a bit. Like, that could have been really funny. And it could have been a funny way to kind of lampshade this idea of, like, oh, it awakens a toxic element in all the men it encounters, this signal. And in Nate, because he's essentially a good person, it awakens this thing of, like, he's being overprotective, you know, and, like, because that is part of toxic masculinity, is this thing of, like, the self-sacrificial man who must protect the woman, right? And, like, they could have done that in a way that was really funny, but it just kind of ends up being a real clunker, because the scene before, he literally hears the signal and starts berating his girlfriend as she throws him out. Then he literally just walks back in. Riley's like, there's a fucking killer in the house, dude, it's crazy. And he immediately turns into, I'm going to save my girl, and then gets killed. And it's kind of like, again, with some kind of build-up to this, with some kind of foreshadowing, this could have been funny. Like, if you'd seen him kind of, I'm kind of thinking of Cabin in the Woods, you know, where, like, Chris Hemsworth, where his character is, like, being drugged into being, like, the stupid stereotypical jock. Where at the start he's quite, like, a clever guy, he's quite woke, he's quite open with his girlfriend, and then as the movie goes along, he gets dumber and more meat-headed. Like, yeah. I was kind of thinking if they did something like that, that'd be kind of funny, where you kind of notice it bubbling away in the background. But instead, it's just like these two scenes. There's one scene where he berates his girlfriend and gets thrown out, and this other scene where he comes back and he's like, fuck you, and then he dies. And it's like, it just doesn't work. Because that's the other thing about Nate, and this is maybe where we can end before we get to Kino or Inferno. Although at this point I think it's pretty obvious what we think.
Absolutely.
So there's this scene where he's first hearing the signal, and he's got this migraine, and he's starting to be, like, mouthy to his girlfriend. And he says to her, she goes, why are you just sitting there drinking a beer or something like this? It's a really weird line of dialogue. And then he goes, I like beer. Now, I want to underscore this, because this is a direct reference, and they bring it up in every interview I've seen with them, to the Brett Kavanaugh trial. I don't even remember this guy.
Oh, really? Is that what that's supposed to be a reference to?
Yes, because he goes on this... I had to look it up because I'd forgotten this, but there was this... He went on this tirade where, obviously when he was being questioned about his previous sexual assault allegation, they kind of asked him about, like, you know, when you were at these parties, did you drink? And he went on this kind of defensive tirade where he was like, yes, I drank beer, I liked beer, we liked beer, boys and girls. You know, he has this long tirade about, like, yes, we were fucking drinking beer. And, you know, he's obviously being defensive. And, like, I want to be abundantly clear, Brett Kavanaugh is a piece of shit and should not have been elected to Supreme Court Justice or whatever the fuck he is. But, like, I don't know how this American shit works, but, like, I just kind of feel like anyone who has a rape allegation against them probably shouldn't be eligible for that position. That said, it feels so out of place in this movie. But every interview I saw with the two women who wrote and directed it, like, they constantly bring up, like, oh, we were so mad about Trump, we were so mad about Brett Kavanaugh. And it's like, okay, you were so mad about it that you made the second Black Christmas remake. Like, do you know what I mean by that? It just feels so out of place. No, I know
exactly what you mean. Like, it feels such misplaced in terms of, like, their feelings and their anger. Like, it's why would you remake Black Christmas in this
I mean, maybe this is the thing with me where it's like, or with us, where it's kind of like, because we're British and these references don't immediately pop to us, we kind of had to do a little dig and go, oh, that's what that is. It kind of lessens the impact, maybe. It lessens the bite.
I mean, even then, like, I feel like the rest of this movie lessens the impact. I feel like
so much of this movie... so glib, like, it's shallow.
Yeah, literally. Like, I said that earlier. I know that was kind of, like you say, tipping a hat a bit, but this film is so glib about what its message is supposed to be that I kind of finished the movie thinking to myself, what is this film supposed to be about? Because it kind of hits you around the head so many times with these... like buzzwords, I guess. Like, it uses things like, you know, patriarchy and the not all men scene in particular I felt was very
again that is this character Nate, right, when he starts going bad, he says,
she's like, don't not all men me, and I'm like,
and he literally says the phrase not all men, like,
and it's it feels so, like, on the nose, and not even in a way that you could kind of forgive. It just feels so almost desperate. I think it's just really kind of desperately trying to get you onto that idea.
I feel like it's just trying to get young women in the audience to go, woo, yeah! And, like, I feel that's they go about it in such a patronising way.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
you know, there is no problem in trying to get women on your side, especially when you're talking about issues that definitely affect young women. But doing it in the way that this film does it, I just don't think it's A, feels genuine, B, feels in any way sympathetic to a lot of those problems, especially in the way that they talk about Riley's sexual assault. It doesn't feel sympathetic in any way, especially the way that her friends talk about it.
They're kind of blaming her for not doing more to fight back against rape in general, and it's like, what?
Yeah, and it's like, your friend got raped. Like, why are you not being more sympathetic? Why are you not, like, trying
to... why is it her responsibility to end rape now?
And it's just, like, it's also the way that they talk about it in front of other people.
Yes,
like,
well, because that's how it becomes public knowledge that her rapist is the guy, right? Because her friend, after the performance they do, says, oh, maybe that'll teach, insert name here, not to rape any more girls, and they kind of run off the stage giggling. And she uploads the video. No, but she uploads the video of the performance with that line not edited out.
But that even happens before that, where because Riley works in a coffee shop and her friends are in the coffee shop with her, and they openly talk about Riley being raped in front of strangers with concern for how she feels about it.
That scene is buck wild. Yeah, I did have that in my notes.
Yeah, it's so disgusting. Honestly, I think it's kind of disgusting.
There's a scene where Chris leans in and she's like, "Rebuild yourself, bitch." It's like, I mean, that line should be punishable by death, quite frankly, but it's... Anyway, look, let's end this segment. What do you reckon, Mark? Kino or Inferno?
It's an Inferno from me. Like, I know obviously you've definitely done a lot more of the talking on the side of this movie than
this was Mark's pick, by the way, everyone.
Yeah, this was my pick, actually, and it's kind of interesting that you've done most of the talking about it, but also I did pick this because I wanted to know what you thought of it. But my slant is I'm going to have to Inferno it, purely for the fact that it completely fails as a horror movie. I know we didn't massively touch on that as much as we should have, but it completely fails as a horror movie, but it tries to have this underlying feminist message, and it tries to talk about things like rape culture and misogyny within fraternities and stuff like that. It falls on its face by saying, oh look, these women-hating men are just possessed by the ghost of some old dude who fucking hated women, and therefore they're not responsible for their actions. Fuck that. Fuck that to the ends of the earth. I will not in any way get on board with that as an idea, where you're trying, especially when you're trying to make a case for, you know, like misogyny within institutionalized male societies and stuff. Like, you can't say they're not responsible for their actions when you're making a movie like this. No, that honestly kind of sickens me to a degree. I think it's
it's very weird.
I think it's like why did they even include that?
Yeah, that element's so strange, especially when the original doesn't really have any paranormal elements.
The original has no paranormal elements to it. The original is just crazy guy breaks into sorority house, starts murdering women. Like, that's what the movie's about. And the sexual politics of the original movie, which we didn't really discuss here because we're going to talk about those movies at another point. The sexual politics of those movies, I think, are actually far more progressive than what this movie is talking about.
I'm going to have to agree with you, Mark, and say this is an Inferno for me. We've gotten kind of heated about this movie, and honestly, like, I kind of wanted to say now, look, if anything I've said's been off the mark or whatever, like, fine, let me know in the comments, like, whatever. Like, I'm open to having a discussion about this stuff, okay? And if anything Mark said has been off the mark, make sure you mention that too.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, yeah, we're talking about a movie that is not geared towards us personally. So
yeah, and that's fine. And like, look, I want to make sure I make this clear, right? I know this movie isn't aimed at me, right? It's aimed at teenage girls, and that's fine. It's fine for things to be aimed at teenage girls and not be for me. However, you know, I'm assessing this movie because Mark's brought it to my attention, and we're doing a podcast about it. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, this movie's good because I think its message is great. Because A, I don't think its message is great. I think it doesn't really know what it's trying to say about any of this stuff.
No, the message is very murky. Like,
I think
what
it's
is
doing
it trying to say?
It's doing this thing that so much of pop culture does at the moment, where it's addressing issues, by which it means just going, rape culture, eh? And then just kind of going like, yeah, that's enough. And it's like, no, tell me, rape culture what? Like, tell me your perspective on this, because this is
don't
this is
just like
not...
display it to me. Give me a reason to engage with that subject.
This film doesn't even display it. This film is kind of saying, like, it's not saying anything really. It's just kind of being like, women should band together and fight the patriarch, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's a fine thing to tell young women, but like at the same time, does not a movie make? And also, it's kind of like, you know, I don't know, man. It's just kind of, I almost feel bad for how hard we've gone in on this movie, because like I think there are good intentions behind it ultimately.
Yeah, I can't fault the movie for having a deviation from the original film. I do actually kind of like the fact that this movie came at the material with this kind of angle. It's just such a shame that it's so misguided and so underdeveloped.
Yeah, it's clumsy, it's underdeveloped, it doesn't... I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, again, sound off in the comments, but to me it doesn't ring true. It's just kind of... It's very weird, it's tonally a mess. And look, I like movies with weird tones and kind of tonal shifts and stuff, but like, this movie doesn't so much have a tonal shift as it just kind of plateaus at nothing. Because it kind of... It leans into this really dark elements and these really heavy elements, but in a way where it just kind of it's a glancing blow. So, like, a classic example of what I'm talking about is this element of, you know, Riley's PTSD flashbacks, which they do show very briefly in this movie, but like, it never inconveniences her socially. It doesn't inconvenience her ability to perform when they're at the frat house. It doesn't really inconvenience her in any moment of action. It's kind of like, it's just paying lip service to these ideas. It's not developing them beyond the hashtag, you know? And that might be like a reductive thing to say, but I think this movie is reductive, ultimately. I think this movie reduces a very complex topic down to a t-shirt, a mug. You know, it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to... Look, you know, the movie's bad. Let's just leave it at that. The movie's bad, but I'm looking forward to the day when there is a movie like this that isn't bad. And if this movie inspires another young female filmmaker to go out there and make a better version of this, then good, so be it. That's worthy, in my opinion.
No, I would completely agree with you in that sense. Like, I don't want it to seem like I'm bashing this movie for those kind of like fundamental issues about the way that it presents its politics and stuff, because I wish this movie was better. I wish it was better. I wish it addressed those themes in a way that was more engaging, more nuanced, more entertaining. You know, like, I wish it did. And sadly, this movie just completely falls flat in that sense. I feel like it was made with such good intentions, like you say, and it's just a fucking mess of a movie as a result, because it just gets so bogged down in trying to convey its message that it forgets to be a horror film. It forgets to actually have characters.
Yeah, anyway, we've been talking about this movie for, I mean, it probably won't be this long in the episode, listeners, but for about over 90 minutes. So, you know, we've done episodes of the show that are that length. So we should probably wrap it up here. I mean, look, it's no bad thing that these movies are out there and trying to be talking about this stuff. I think from the heated nature of this discussion, you can tell that, like, this is something that, you know, we're cognizant of and we're aware of and we're trying to, you know, navigate, I suppose. And look, I think I will say this, like, this movie is obviously aimed at women. I don't think it does its audience any favours, to be honest. Again, if people disagree with me on that, that's totally fine. Because I'm not the target audience for this film, so I'm talking about the one woman that I watched it with, who I guess is not a sample. It's not a full sample. But also, I read a lot of reviews from women who are echoing what we're saying. So,
and I think when they are trying to take something like Black Christmas, which is a proto-slasher movie, it's not technically a slasher movie. We won't get into that anyway, but something where the original movie is also set in a sorority house, therefore it has female-centric plot lines and narratives, and I think the original movie does really well with those kinds of stories, and I can see why they use that as a jumping off point for this movie. It feels like it gets bogged down in these really quite obnoxious details, and this film just, it doesn't do it for me at all. I think it's a shame. I feel like you could have done something quite interesting when talking about ideas like feminism and rape culture in regards to the original movie. You could have done something.
And to slasher movies as a genre.
Yeah,
as well,
and slasher movies, you know, some people have argued that they're misogynist and some people have argued against that assertion, but there has definitely always been strong, I mean, I hate that phrase, like strong female characters. Or
strong female characters.
Yeah, I know that's a really shitty phrase to use.
The old SFC.
Yeah, like, it's a really shitty phrase to use, but, like, the slasher genre does have well-written female characters that use their initiative and instincts and survival instincts to fight back against evil, and that's always kind of been a thing. And a lot of slasher movies have done good on that, a lot of slasher movies have done bad on that. This is definitely one of the ones that I think has done bad on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about this is it tries to have several final girls rather than one. But I think the fact of the matter is we just don't know these other characters and we don't care about them. So it's kind of like, really, there is only one final girl because there's only one character that we know about and care about. So it's kind of like...
And just also happens to be played by the only actress in this movie of note.
Who's any good.
Yeah,
at least in this movie. I hate kind of being...
At least in this
movie. I kind of do hate being like, you're a shit actor because you were shit in this one movie I saw. Cause like,
no, yeah. That's never any kind of assertion.
It's always 50-50 between acting and directing. Yeah.
But also, Imogen Poots is the only actor in this movie who I think kind of tries to sell the material.
Yes, she has a delightful name and is quite a good actor. So you should check her out in other things. Yeah, before we move on, I do want to just say this to reassure the one woman who listens to this podcast, namely my mother, that Mark and I are not sexist pigs. You know, I think it's fair to say we're both of the opinion that whatever we think of this movie, or whatever we think of any individual movie on this subject matter, there should be more films written by women, directed by women, produced by women that are allowed to talk about this stuff and allowed to do it in a controversial and divisive manner, because I think that's part of it, you know. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
And in general, there should be more female directors out there. I mean, there are a lot of great directors and writers out there doing great work, but obviously, women of any kind are still vastly underrepresented in the industry.
Well, ultimately, they just don't get the same chances that men do, and that's an entire issue unto itself.
Yeah, and it's kind of... Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we're not equipped to unpack about that, really, but, like... Yeah, and I think it's very telling when we're talking about this stuff that there's only been 2 female winners of the Best Director Oscar. It's Catherine Bigelow and Chloe Zhao, who very recently won, in fact.
Was that for... What was that movie? Was it Frances McDormand was in it?
Nomadland.
Nomadland, that's it. Yeah, I didn't see
I've
that.
not seen it either. It's on my to-watch list. I've heard mixed things, actually, but that normally makes...
But still, though, like, the only 2 women to win the Academy Award for Best Director, that's...
Yeah, it's fucking wild, considering
insane.
some of the...
That's insane.
Considering some of the shit that does win Oscars.
But enough about gold-plated statues of men. Let's talk about men covered in snow.
And with their dicks out.
This mountain is like a giant icebox.
For storing what?
Drill deeper. Prepare the dynamite. You have a grave to rob.
We have Santa Claus. Selitä sille, että meillä on täällä pukki myytävänä.
So, Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale, is a 2010 Finnish festive horror flick about a multinational excavation team digging up the original Santa, actually a cruel child-punishing entity long buried under a mountain in Lapland. They quickly lose control of the creature, and it menaces a local reindeer hunter in his community, with only the hunter's young son figuring out who or what is responsible for the reindeer mutilations and child abductions that follow. Hilarity ensues.
Yeah, definitely that is a great summation of Rare Exports.
Yes, I mean, there's a few more ins and outs that we'll get into as we go across. Now, this was my selection for Crimbo Inferno. Slightly less politically charged movie
You could
than
say
Mark's
that.
choice. So we're going to have a few laughs with this one. But yeah, so Mark, I've seen this before. What did you think of the movie? Because you've not seen it before, right?
No, I'd not really heard of it before either. You mentioned it to me, so when you said I want to talk about rare exports, I kind of vaguely knew about it, didn't really know what it was about or anything, so was very happy to check it out for this podcast. And I have to say, I quite liked this movie. Liked it quite a lot, actually, I have to say. Immediately, my thoughts for this film were originally geared more towards things like Gremlins and The Goonies. It has that kind of undercurrent of those kind of 80s faux genre pieces that are looking at supernatural forces or horror elements. But then as the movie went on, it reminded me more of another recent movie, which is deliberately channeling those kind of 80s films. It really reminded me of Overlord. If you saw Overlord, you must have seen Overlord.
No, I did see Overlord, yeah.
But only in the sense that it had this very B-movie premise, but everybody involved in it is playing it completely down the middle. Like, it's played so straight.
Yeah, I think that makes for better B-movies as well. Like, you know, people will come to you with your Kung Furies and all this shit, but like, I prefer a B movie that's kind of straight faced. You know, no winking at the audience too much. I mean, this movie has a few little nods and winks. Like, definitely when they so the opening scene where you see the excavation site where they're digging up this original Santa. There is a scene where the American, but not really, boss of this excavation team is kind of handing out these laminated list of rules for interactions with the creature. And it says things, you know, like no bad language, wash behind your ears, that kind of thing. Because obviously it's Santa, so he doesn't like naughtiness. Which so you know, there's an absurdity to this movie, and it is tongue in cheek, but it's definitely not. There's none of that kind of how can I put this? Sort of Joss Whedon-y humour of like, well, that just happened.
Yeah, there's no kind of snark
kind of
to it. There's no kind of disrespect for the subject matter, I think. That's kind of one of the things I like the most about this movie is even though it is, like you say in your summation, it's basically about people capturing an evil Santa Claus, which on the surface sounds like a ridiculous and very funny idea. But this movie, while it is still funny, it plays it so straight. And that's why it's funny.
And it's a very Finnish sense of humour that it has as well. Like, it's very understated, very kind of black humour.
Yeah, another film that this really reminded me of was Troll Hunter.
Yes. That's a Norwegian movie, right? Not Troll Hunter, but that's definitely a watch this space, because I love Troll Hunter.
I love Troll Hunter as well, because, again, that is a movie that has a ridiculous premise, but is played so straight, and therefore,
and in a way, we could have paired these two movies together because they're both kind of dealing with Scandinavian folklore in a way. Like this idea of like the original Santa being this kind of goat demon, like that is true to Finnish folklore. Like that is something that is, because they even call it this crazy Finnish word that means that, like to this day, the Finnish word for Santa Claus means like old billy goat.
Yeah.
So like they depict Santa Claus as we do now. But the original version is much more in line with, Krampus and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Krampus is, again, another movie that I think I would compare this to, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Krampus.
Krampus is influenced by this.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Krampus, personally. I think it's too tonally inconsistent for its own good. I think Krampus tries to have its cake and eat it with the horror and the comedy stuff, whereas I think Rare Exports treads the line perfectly between horror and comedy, because all of the comedy is built out of the absurdity of the situation, but it's not played for sort of camp laughs, whereas I think the humour really kind of stems from the audience picking up on how ridiculous everything is.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of humour as well about like how the adults in this kind of... because we should say the majority of the action takes place like a little bit away from the excavation site proper. It's in this kind of like reindeer hunting and farming community,
which admittedly is only on the cusp of where this Santa Claus project is happening, because it's just separated by a fence.
Yeah, it's literally separated by a fence. Yeah. And again, that's the kind of humour that they build on, is like they have this idea of like, it's these very kind of downtrodden working guys just kind of interacting with one another in this very kind of like deadpan way. And I think like one thing that's fucking hilarious is the main kid's dad is like always trying to turn the situation into a moneymaker. He's always, because what they kind of get involved with the story because one of the spoilers, one of the Santas escapes from the excavation site and mutilates all the reindeer that they were going to hunt and sell and use for their own food. Which, by the way, this is a real thing that happens in Lapland, by the way. The Finnish, they eat reindeer.
Well, I mean, if it is plentiful, why wouldn't they? Not that
plentiful. I imagine it's a very tough meat.
Probably is, and probably gets them through the winters, which they're definitely used to.
Yes. They have real winters over there. Snowy as fuck.
Not this pussy-ass British winter where we get snow for a few days and act like the world's ending. But that's a whole other issue.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Have you ever tried to get a bus in fucking January?
Have you tried getting a bus in this climate? In this political climate?
I know. In the Thatcher's Britain.
Might as fucking well be. Jesus Christ. Stick a wig on Boris Johnson, he'd basically be Thatcher. Anyway,
we're getting sidetracked. So this movie, I don't know where I was going with that. I confidently just said this movie and had nothing to follow up with. I'm a few beers deep, listeners.
Well, I mean, if the previous segment's anything to go by, we both are.
We've all had a few. Because we were fucking Larry in that last one. And now we just don't know whether we're coming or going. So, so to take it through the plot of this movie, and this movie's plot is slight, to say the least. It's a gentleman's 80 minutes.
Oh, yeah, like, it's a very brisk 80 minutes. Even I have to say, like, when I first was about to put this movie on and saw that it was 80 minutes long, I actually felt it was a little bit of a blessing. So I was like, cool, I get to watch a short movie for this podcast, which doesn't happen very often. However, it might be a bit too short. I feel like the film doesn't really have enough time to breathe, especially when it gets towards its third act. I mean, I did like this movie a lot, and I will definitely welcome it more on some more festive viewings in later years. However, I do think it's a bit too short. It doesn't really have enough time to breathe and have enough time to really sort of get me invested in it, even though I like where it goes and I like the story. It's a little bit too deft, I think.
Yeah, but perhaps. I will say this. I definitely felt that more the first time I watched this.
Okay.
Watching it again, I didn't have that as much. I would say that I kind of agree that, like, and we'll kind of go through, because I assume most people haven't seen this, so we'll kind of go through the plot a little bit in a minute. But, by the time it gets to the third act where everything's kicking off, the evil Santas are running amok, and the big goat demon is going to awaken. By the time it gets to that, I would say that act could actually do with maybe 5 minutes more.
Yeah, it needs more.
And only 5 minutes more, you know. It doesn't actually need that much more. I'm just kind of like, just a little bit more.
Yeah, because by the time we get introduced to, giant-ass frozen Santa Claus, it feels like the movie rushes to conclude that as a point. And I know we are definitely getting ahead of ourselves, because compared to the last segment where we kind of went around the houses a little bit, you can't really do that with rare exports, because...
Yeah, because it's very straight down the middle, like straight down the line.
Yeah, like I would say, considering the protagonist of this movie is a child, it feels like you're following this child as they go down a massive hill on their sledge. Like, that's a sled, sorry, not sledge. That's kind of how it feels. Like, you just...
Sister sledge. So, right, yes, we'll go through this movie as best we can. And we should say, the one character whose name I've got written down is the main kid, who is Pietari.
Yes,
Pietari. These lads all have Finnish-ass names. We're not going to say them right, so we're just going to say, like, Beard Man. We just get all like Pietari's dad,
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if we've got any listeners in Finland, they'll go mental. Anyway, so we kind of open this movie with Pietari looking through these books about the old Santa Claus, right? Was that the opening? Or was that the yeah? That is, he kind of looks it up later on because you see him and the other kid they've been spying on the excavation anyway, so they kind of have this. So they sort of suspect what's going on, and he's kind of looking through these books, and it's got all this crazy like pagan imagery of the goat man and all the kind of Krampus with his big switch that he hits kids with.
And some very graphic imagery, may I point out. Like, some really quite horrible images of children being tortured and maimed by these Santa Claus figures.
Yes, it's crazy. And you see that he is, like, shit scared of this notion. And then the scene after that, we were introduced to Pietari's dad, who was a hunter / farmer. I'm not really sure what you'd call these guys, because they are definitely hunters. There's a wild reindeer that they're entrapping.
Like reindeer herders, I guess. They kind of herd the reindeers into their enclosure for them to then kill and do what they do.
There's probably a Finnish term for this, but like they are essentially, for all intents and purposes, hunter farmers, I guess, because they do herd reindeer, but they're not their reindeer, because you see when they're looking out to there's a bit where they're kind of looking out to the horizon. And Pietari sees the first reindeer coming and he goes, they're here, and then there's this herd coming. And then they will spring into action and kind of siphon them off into these pens and stuff. But anyway, we're introduced to his dad, who we're introduced to him slaughtering a pig.
Very graphically, may I point out.
Yes. And, he kind of chastises Pietari for not being dressed and for babbling on nonsense and stuff like this, but also refuses to let him see him slaughtering the pig.
Yeah, which I always thought was quite an interesting point. That was interesting, where he says, like, "Oh, Dad, can I come in?" He says, "I'm working, please close your eyes." And that, to me, was an interesting point where, obviously, Pietari grows up in this environment, but he's not allowed to see the harsh reality of what's really going on around him.
Yeah.
Which,
but at the same time, we see that he's fascinated by harsh realities.
Yeah,
that's a recurring theme,
But yeah, like I feel like his interests are more based in like kind of flights of fantasy. Like he is looking at these mythological depictions of Santa Claus and such.
Well, he does. I mean, we're jumping ahead again, but when they discover what they think is a dead human body later on, Pietari, he does want to, like, he's interested in looking at that.
Which again, his dad forbids him from doing. Yeah.
So I think there's this thing with that character where. Because we do later find out in the movie that his mum is dead.
Yes.
So I think what we're supposed to take from that is, like, he is interested in these more morbid things. He is interested in that as kind of like a coping mechanism almost. And again, this is a movie where, like, they don't spell that out. They barely spell out that the mum is dead. You just don't hear about her, and at a certain point, someone mentions, ever since his mum's passed. And there's no scene in this, and like the emotional core of this movie is the relationship between Pietari, we're just saying this any odd way, whenever it comes up, and his father, because we see that his father has he's struggling with the fact that this is the first Christmas without the mother, and we see that he's trying to be a good father, but he's torn between his duties as the head reindeer herder man and kind of looking after this son who's getting interested in dangerous things and going off on one and all this, and you see this and it's all very well acted, I would say, especially from the child actors in this movie are really good, actually. But I would say that what I find interesting about all this is, like, it's established very economically, the dynamic between Pietari and his dad. Like, there's no point where he turns around to his dad and goes, "You've been like this ever since your mum died, you bastard," or any of that you would probably get in an American movie.
Yeah, and I think,
or to be honest, in an English movie.
But again, I feel like the film never tries to bog itself down in those ideas. I think the film just tries to portray them as very matter of fact. Like, the only scene where you really kind of see that, and again, it's quite early in the movie, is where it's the day before Christmas, and Pietari's dad has made gingerbread for them, which is something that his mum used to do, and they just share this really lovely scene together where they're eating the gingerbread with some milk. And
And this is one of the few scenes that acknowledges the mum, because he says, "Oh, it's just this gingerbread's just like mum used to make."
Yeah, and it's that little bit where you see Pietri's dad crying, and he's clearly struggling to deal with the emotions that he's feeling at that point in time. But he's not like breaking down crying. He's clearly trying to keep a front going, but he's like got tears streaming down his face.
It's a great scene.
And it's really effective. I think it's really effective at putting that message across in a way that's not.
It makes you care so much about both of them.
Yeah,
you want them to work it out.
Yeah, even though, as we keep repeatedly seeing, his dad is more concerned with money.
Well, his dad, his dad is certainly a flawed character.
Absolutely, not as much as his friend, who always likes to mention the VAT whenever that comes up in conversation.
Yeah, that was funny.
That's one of my favourite jokes in the movie, admittedly.
Yes, because we say that joke is set up when. Pietari and his young friend from down the way, they're trying to spy on the excavation site across the way, and so they cut through the security fence that's supposed to keep the reindeer in, and so the reindeer get mutilated by what we found out later is the evil Santa.
The evil Santa does kill a lot of reindeer,
a fuckload of reindeer. And obviously the farmers are very put out by that, because that was supposed to be their yearly haul. Basically, that's what they're supposed to live off. And there's a bit where Pietri's dad is saying, like, how much is that? Like, looking at the carnage of these slaughtered reindeers and going, like, how much money have we lost there? And the other guy, I think they say that guy's Russian or something. Like, there's some connection to Russia with that dude.
Yeah, don't correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't it where Pietri's house is, they have a fence that corners it off to the mountain where they're supposedly digging up evil Santa, and they say it's like a border to Russia or something?
Yeah. So this movie, so it's a real mountain, the name of which I won't insult the listeners by trying to pronounce, but it is on the border between Finland and Russia.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I remember seeing that in the movie and thinking that's a really weird location to set a movie in, but also for the sake of this movie works quite well, I think.
But Pietari's dad looks at the mutilated reindeer and goes, how much money have we lost there? And the other guy quickly does the math and however many thousand per kilo or whatever, and then goes plus 22% of VAT or whatever. And that's something that comes back later on as well. And we should say that guy is the father of Pietari's little friend, whose name I think is Juso.
Yeah, I believe that's how it's pronounced, yeah.
We're going to say Juso.
Juso.
Yes, and Juso's a little shit, really, because Pietari wants to be like... Because he says to him, we should fess up about the fact that we cut the fence, because they think at this point that a wolf's got in.
Yeah, because to backpedal ever so slightly, Pietari has seen that there are footprints outside his window, which he believes is that Santa has been spying on him. And then shortly after that, he sees this carnage of reindeer. And then their fathers look at the fence and see a hole has been cut in it, so they deduce that wolves must have somehow wolves decimated this giant herd of reindeer.
No, they specifically say Russian wolves.
Yeah, because apparently they're a different breed,
Yeah, I think they are. It's like Siberian wolves are different to... Yeah, I'm not a wolf scientist, Mark.
I mean, I never said you were, but I'm going to be sad that you can't clarify that for me. Anyway.
There's different types. Russian wolves, they're just pissed on vodka the whole time.
Just eating raw potatoes out the ground in the hopes. So yeah, they believe that wolves have gotten in, even though it was Pietri and his friend that cut this hole in the fence to go spy on this mountain where these, I believe they're British?
Well, they're supposed to be American.
Really? Because they're very British.
Yes. What we're seeing is Finnish actors speaking English.
Right, okay. So they've been spying on this mountain where people are drilling.
Well,
and have
it's
supposedly
a multinational. It's a multinational, but yeah, they do say that it's American.
And these people are basically drilling into this mountain and have, for all intents and purposes, discovered Santa.
Yes. So kind of jumping ahead slightly. Because this is a movie where we don't need to go into every little detail and go bogged down in it, but we'll give you the broad strokes.
No, because there isn't really that much to go on. It's a very, very swift plot.
Yeah. So basically, Pietro is trying to convince everyone that an evil Santa is on the loose. They're not buying it for obvious reasons.
Because why would you?
Yeah. But yes, at one point, a human corpse, or what they think is a human corpse, turns up in one of Pietro's father's illegal wolf traps.
Which is quite literally a hole in the ground with spikes in it.
Yes. And him and what we're going to call chubby bearded friend, they... it's quite funny because chubby bearded friend is dressed as Santa already.
For most of the movie as well, yeah.
He's going to go around the village doing his Santa stops and stuff.
Which we do find out he is paid to do.
yeah. He's also always wearing Ray-Bans at every opportunity.
Ray-Bans in a Santa outfit. It's honestly low-key iconic.
It is a look. So they haul the... what we find out is the corpse of Santa. A skinny, emaciated Santa, but Santa nonetheless. And they take him into one of the warehouses or whatever. And they discuss cutting up the body so that no one discovers their illegal wolf traps.
Which, can I point out, is their first resort.
Yeah, well, the finish, mate. They don't fuck about.
Straight to the finish line. Oh. Yeah, I went there.
That's the end of this podcast.
Bye. Anyway.
good knowing you. Good seeing you. No, so anyway, look. They're going to cut up the body, but then the body comes to life. It comes to life because Pietari is spying through the window of the warehouse, and he smells Pietari's child blood on the breeze.
Is that what happens? Is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because we see a great shot of Pietari looking through the kind of frost-stained window, and then you see Santa's little sniffing, his little nose sniffing. There's a close-up of that. So I think we're supposed to...
I thought it was the gingerbread.
Well, maybe it's ambiguous, but
because
I'm pretty
that's
sure
used a little bit later on, isn't it? They realise...
It's used later on, yeah, but I'm pretty sure we're supposed to intuit that he smells a naughty child on the breeze. Because it is also brought up that Pietari feels that he needs to be punished so that Santa doesn't get him.
Yeah, that's very true, actually, yeah. Because he's one of the only children... Well, I mean, we only see him and his friend, who is a little shit, like you say. And Pietari is the only child who we see that has any sense of, like, wanting to repent for what he's done.
Yes, because he feels guilty about cutting the fence. And
well, like he should. A lot of reindeer died.
But the reason he doesn't is that Juso swears him to silence.
He does, yes.
Yeah. Anywho, they quickly... so, just to kind of summarise the rest of the movie, they interview / interrogate the Santa, still believing him to be human. The possibly Russian guy, Juso's father, speaks English, so he interrogates him in English, but to no avail. And the evil Santa only really shows any interest when Pietari's in the vicinity. I'm going to say it now, the Thackeray Binks Award has been won. By this gentleman, evil Santa. Anyway, they quickly start to believe Pietari's story, because certain inexplicable elements of the evil Santa come to light.
Like the gingerbread.
Yeah, all this kind of weird stuff that he does. So anyway, they decide they're going to sell back the evil Santa to the excavation team. They get there, and the head of the excavation is willing to pay them the money, but he drops a truth bomb on them. The guy they have in the cage is not Santa.
Boom. And to me, personally, this is where this movie went from very intriguing and darkly funny to genuinely quite engaging.
Yes. He reveals this is not Santa, but one of his elves. The real Santa, we find out, is locked behind door 24 of this excavation. It's like an advent calendar, you get it? And in fact, was buried.
I'm honestly ashamed to say that I didn't get that.
Wow, okay.
I was very sleep deprived when I watched this, Agent, okay?
I mean, there's literally several shots of Pietari's advent calendar, and he even staples shut door 24 at one point.
Ooh, I missed that.
But anyway, so Mark's negligence aside, we see that the real Santa is a massive goat-like creature. All that they've managed to chip out of the mountain so far is, a still frozen body with just these giant horns protruding out of this block of ice.
And we must say, this creature is like fucking 30 foot tall or something.
Yeah, it's kaiju
huge.
level.
Yeah, it's and it's clearly like curled up as well. Like this thing is huge.
And it is carrying a switch, like a wooden switch.
Which is basically a full fucking tree.
Yeah, it's like a fucking tree. So, because they kind of make a joke earlier on about, like, you know, the Krampus-style goat man, it whips naughty children on the arse. Because Pietri's, at one point, he's like, to his mate Juso, because he's going around in a suit of, like, hockey pads and armour and stuff.
And cardboard
he has,
over
like,
his arse.
Yeah, he has a big cardboard panel over his
arse.
arse, yeah. And he's like, put this over your bum, to his mate. But yeah, then when you see the switch that the actual thing is carrying, it's a fucking tree. Like, Jesus.
But again, like I say, in a lesser movie, that would feel goofy and, like, not in any way threatening. But because this movie does play itself quite straight, it comes across as a little bit threatening. And
yeah, because at this point, we should say that, like, all the children in the village, apart from Pietri, have been abducted by the elves.
And that's one thing I want to talk about. So, like, we're skipping over the middle of this movie a lot, only because it just becomes like a series of lore building.
It's like a slow build-up,
Yeah, like, they build up the lore around what Santa is, and Pietri is the only one who's clearly seeing what's going on, whereas all the adults around him are just more focused on the fact that all the reindeer are dead, and they want to know exactly what's going on. But Pietri is the one that realizes that all the kids have gone missing. Which he does by phoning all of their parents, who, may I point out, do not seem that concerned.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the theme with this movie, is the kids are pretty free range, right? Because when they say to Juso's dad, like, oh, he's been missing for, 3 or 4 hours or something, he just goes, I'll be back by nightfall.
It's like, you've got so many dead reindeer, which you think might be maybe killed by...
I'm telling you, it's just Finnish people, mate. That's what they're like.
What, they're just fine with the fact that, like, their kids may get killed by wolves?
No, these are Finnish kids. That's what you've got to factor in.
Wolf death is a thing, apparently.
They're hardcore kids. They're not like these pussy children you see round our way.
The kids round our way stab people, Aidan.
Yeah, they stab people, exactly. Finnish kids wrestle a wolf to death with their bare hands.
That's by the time they're on bottles.
Yeah. Anyway, incredibly accurate information about Finland aside. So anyway, the point is, the end of this movie, we find out, because it's also mentioned that Juso's dad's wife, it would have been easy to say Juso's mum, but I didn't take the easy route there, her hairdryer has gone missing, as have several radiators in the village.
Yeah, this is one of my favourite gags in the entire movie, I have to say.
And it turns out the elves have nicked them because they're trying to defrost Santa from this massive ice cluster that he's in. There's some truly alarming scenes of... Because we should say the elves are just bearded, naked old men. And
they really are. Like,
you see it all.
Yeah, because they spend so much of this movie building up this one dude who they believe to be Santa. Because they capture him, essentially. Like, he gets captured around halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, whilst Pietri's kind of going through all these things where he's, like, figuring out what's going on, the adults capture this old dude. And then, obviously, we do get the reveal, like you mentioned, where he's not Santa, he's one of Santa's elves. And that leads to several hilarious moments where they've just got this fucking dude tied up, swinging from the fucking rafters by chains and stuff as they're trying to interrogate him. And it's just not working.
Mildly terrifying old man just hanging from the rafters, yeah.
And then they suddenly have the great idea of being like, do you know what? We'll sell him. We'll just sell him to the people that are excavating this mountain. And so they
want to recoup their losses from the reindeer.
Well, of course, because that's all that they're interested in doing is just getting money. That's all they want to do. And so they're like, we'll sell this motherfucker. No idea who he is. They've just tied him up. He bit one of their ears off. That's entirely besides the point. And so they go like,
Yeah.
oh, we'll sell him. So they take him to the hangars where these people are doing this excavation. And that's when the reveal comes where it's like, oh, he's not Santa. He's an elf. And I love that where the guy who reveals that information says, oh, wait. Guys, drop your weapons. You got to look nice. Look smile and be as nice as you can, because then a swarm of naked old men just appear out of the fucking darkness. And it might be one of the most wonderful images I've ever seen in a Christmas movie.
It's crazy.
It's fucking insane. And also, the CGI is bad, may I point out.
Yeah,
the
there is some bad CGI.
The CG that is used to put across the idea that there are hundreds of naked old men with sickles and hammers and all kinds of fucking weaponry is bad.
There are a lot of real naked old men, though.
So many old cocks in the wind.
Oh, yeah. You see them old boys flopping around.
You see dust coming off the balls. Like, you just see
it. It's quite something.
It's quite distressing.
This movie, you could almost be fooled into thinking it's a kid's movie to begin with. But then, you get the occasional F-bomb, some mutilated reindeer. But then by the end of it, you're seeing, fucking like 30 or 40 completely Billy Bollocks old men just running at the camera. Just
old cock in a blizzard. That's what this movie is.
Old cock in a blizzard. And let me tell you something. Some of these boys cold. Some of these boys not so cold.
And honestly, they're just laying chum all up and down this mountain.
Yes. It is remarkable stuff, really.
It is a plethora of geriatric cock, is this
and
movie.
This is the thing about European movies. They are not afraid to show cock and balls.
No, and honestly, fair play to him. Like, not just saying this is somebody who enjoys the old cock and bollocks.
Cock and balls, yeah. Big fan.
Big fan. In and around the face. Anyway.
Good lord. I told you my mum listens to this.
Hi. But no, so it just devolves into this small group of men trying to fight off a swarm of naked old men. And that alone is brilliant. And if I can possibly contrast it against Black Christmas for 1 second.
Sure.
Feels earned, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, this is a movie that knows how to do build-up and then pay off.
Absolutely. Whereas instead of just college girls kill black goo-infested men because they hate women, this is old dudes with their cocks out running out the woods to kill people in the name of Santa. And I'm fine with that.
And it kind of, this is the thing, I guess this is kind of what we're talking about with Black Christmas, is like, this movie sells you on that absurd premise. And I think it does so because there is none of that kind of winky stuff in it, It's kind of like there's humour in this movie. Like, I was laughing throughout this movie, but like you say, it's straight-faced. The characters, you care about the characters as well. That's the thing. You come to care about them.
Yeah, because
even though they're not perfect people,
Yeah, it establishes their dynamics quite early. It never overstates any of what their intentions are, because we know that they're just like reindeer farmers, I guess. That's what they do, and they are obviously very interested in money. That's why they do what they do. And so when the reindeer all get slaughtered due to Pietri and his friend's mistake, that becomes a whole plot point in the movie, because he believes that Santa is this force that will punish him if he does wrong, so therefore he wants to make right on that. And everything in this movie is really well seeded, and the payoff, despite the fact that I do think the third act of the movie is very rushed, mostly due to the fact that it is 80 odd minutes long. Despite the rush payoff, there is payoff. There's very satisfying payoff. The final few minutes of the movie I think are a little bit weird.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that, because that's very weird to me, and is the only reason why the movie is called Rare Exports, to my mind.
Yes, this is something we'll get to, because there's some context for that. But we should say the movie kind of finally reaches its climax when the grown-ups finally decide to listen to Pietri. And this is what I'm talking about. This movie has some really well done setup and payoff stuff. So early on in the movie, Pietri's father gives him a shotgun. This small child is given a shotgun, and says, "Oh, this is yours now," And the only time Pietri uses it is to gain the attention of the bickering adults towards the end. Yes. He fires it into the ceiling, and so it's this kind of interesting idea of he's given like it's this very almost typical scene of like father son in the wilderness masculinity, but then ultimately Pietro uses it to assert his own kind of manhood at the end
without resorting to violence.
Yeah, and it relies on his intelligence as well, because this is something that we see about this kid is he's very curious, he's very intelligent, he reads up on stuff, he researches stuff. His friend Juso is like an ignorant bumperclut, but who just kind of always thinks about just how it benefits him, whereas we see like Pietro's not like that. He thinks about how to create a situation that benefits everyone and how to fix his mistake. And it's a fucking cool ass line as well, because there's a bit where because it's a hilarious scene where he lays down his plan to the adults. And again, this kid actor, he's fucking great, and he's in the director's sole other movie as well, where he actually plays. He's a little older in that, but he plays like a kind of tween action hero in that, and he's fucking amazing.
I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds great.
Yes, also starring Samuel L. Jackson as the President of the United States.
What?
This movie is called Big Game, and we will be watching it at some point on the pod.
Stay tuned, listeners. Stay tuned. We're doing Big Game.
I can't remember if it's any good or not, but I remember enjoying it.
I will watch it regardless.
Yeah, but anyway, so what I was going to say about that was, he shoots his gun in the air to get their attention. Then he lays down his plan of, we're going to blow up the big Santa, because it's established that the elves are following their master. They're not necessarily of their own free will. Because the elves are kind of like feral creatures. As much as we're saying they're old men, they are like creatures, they're animals.
Yeah, like...
The movie makes that clear.
Yeah, they're very feral, and they're very sort of like one-track mind. Like, they follow a leader and they kill. That's kind of what they do.
Yeah. So Pietro has this plan of like getting all the children who've already been abducted in their little sacks into... and we should say there's a great scene early on where... not early on, but earlier than this, where one of the farmers is complaining to the local copper that... no, it's Juso's father, in fact, because he says his side hustle is in selling potatoes, and he mentions that all his potato sacks have gone missing. And there's an incredible shot of just a shed filled with potatoes, just lining the floor, up the walls, all over the place.
I love that scene so much, because again, that's such a great use of that kind of humour, and it's not completely in your face, and it's not just trying to... It doesn't treat the audience as if they're idiots. It says, all my sacks are missing, and you go, well, we know exactly what that is.
Yeah, and it's like a well-delivered visual gag, because you see the room full of potatoes, and then he says, all my sacks are missing. And it's like, it registers like you're looking at a room full of potatoes.
It's great. And it's the same as the bit that you mentioned earlier, where you say that his wife's hairdryer is missing. And at first you wonder, what the fuck is the significance of the hairdryer?
And he's going on about how it's a high-end... hairdryer, it's got all these settings and stuff. Yeah, but then later on, when they get to the excavation site, he sees it on the ground, and that's when it's revealed that like they've been stealing the radiators and presumably hairdryers to help thaw out Santa. And again, it's just like the humor. Like there's no like wacka wacka. It's a joke.
Yeah,
but, like,
it's just there. It's very matter of fact, and if you don't pick up on it as a joke, then that's on you. Like it's there, and you just move on from it, and that's
one of my favourite lines. Kind of one of my favourite lines is, I don't know how old Pietro is supposed to be. He's like 9 or 10 or something. And like after that scene where he shoots his gun in the air to get their attention, he lays down this plan of, we're going to lure the elves away by putting all the sacks of children into like a big net, which is going to be flown away by
I wanted to talk about this.
By a fat beardy guy in a helicopter. He's going to draw them away whilst Juso and Pietro's father blow up the big Krampus monster. And he's going to lead them into it. There's some crazy shit in this.
Yeah,
and the kid,
for a low budget movie, this goes places.
But the kid absolutely sells it, because he lays down this plan. He pulls off the sheet revealing all the explosives, and he goes, "There's a choice here between me or Santa, and I choose me." it's pitch perfect. It's so funny.
And what makes it even funnier is when they start going through with his plan. They get this giant net, and they put all the kids, still in the sacks, may I point out, in this giant net, fly it out of the hangar to lure all the elves away, because they say, whilst the children are here, the elves will not leave Santa alone. So they just fly away with this giant net full of sacks of screaming children. And fly it across the mountains to get all these naked old dudes to follow them. This film is every bit as batshit insane as I am describing it, by the way. May I point that out?
It's crazy.
It's absolutely fucking nanas. It really is. But so brilliant and so funny, and
I mean, the funniest part of that scene,
it.
that whole visual is hilarious, but the funny part of that scene is Pietri going to what he thinks is going to be his sacrifice when he kills all the... well, he's going to kill all the elves, but he finds out he doesn't need to at the last minute, right? Yeah. And it's fucking amazing, because he's on the walkie-talkie to Beardy Ray-Ban's man in the helicopter. He's going like, you know, I've got to do what I've got to do, tell my dad what I did and all this shit. It's just like... I shouldn't be laughing at the thought of, like, a 9-year-old being killed by a bunch of old men. But it's just like... I don't know who this kid is, but, like, he's just... It's pitch perfect, the performance. Like,
there's also the weirdest visual in this movie where that kid is about to lay down his life to kill all the creepy old elf cockman. And as he's got this army of naked men running at him, just cocks flapping in the wind, there's this weird close-up where he just says daddy, and I'm like, something about this is just not okay to me. Like,
he's talking about his father.
I know, but it's just so weird. Like, it's just so weird.
But that's something I wanted to highlight when we talk about the relationship with his father. Is like, as we said, it's very understated, but you get this sense of like his dad is struggling to maintain, you know, the work-life balance. He's struggling to be the man he needs to be to provide for his son, but also struggling to provide emotionally for his son. And you see that there's this kind of like... And I think in a lesser movie there'd be more of this kind of glowering resentment. They kind of hate each other. But you never get that sense. You get the sense that they're frustrated by each other, and that they want to have this connection that's missing, that was maybe facilitated by the mother. But then I love that that whole plot is resolved in just 2 lines. Because we see that Pietri's plan has worked. We then see that he kind of figures out that the elves are now listless. They don't have the call of Santa in their minds anymore, so they're just kind of wandering aimlessly about. They don't want to kill him. And he herds them all into one of the reindeer pens. And then his dad is kind of looking out at what he's achieved and just goes, you know, you're quite the man. And Pietri just replies with, like, so are you. And it's just like, it's a very nice scene because it's so understated. It's just kind of like...
And I think why that works as well is because not only is Pietri displaying ideas that he would have got from his dad, from the fact that his dad's like a reindeer herder and stuff, but also because his mother is a presence in the movie that is only like talked about, it's seeing that ultimately Pietri only is able to put 2 and 2 together about what's really going on because he indulges himself in things like books and sort of like flights of fantasy and stuff, which many people would attribute to possibly being feminine traits. And his plan at the end definitely feels like an amalgamation of both those influences of his parents, and his dad is appreciating that about him, I think.
Yeah, and there's the nice kind of callback to the how much money have we lost with the reindeer scene, where he turns to Juso and says like, you know, $8,000 per Santa, how much is that? And Juso's father leans down to whisper the results, and then also whisper the VAT. Which I
love that VAT gag so much.
And again, I like that that's like a little undercurrent as well, is that like, although Juso's a little shit, you do see he has a good relationship with his dad. And, you know, I like that, like, so many movies like this are just kind of like so kind of mean-spirited and cynical. And I like that this movie, although it is kind of poking fun at the notion of a Christmas movie, and it is very, like they explicitly call out the Coca-Cola Santa as being a hoax and stuff like this.
Yeah.
I love that this movie is still like a movie about family at the end of the day. Like, it is genuinely a Christmas movie. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
And like, yeah, I just think it's cool. And I think it's kind of, it's definitely one thing I wanted to point out before we get into the weirdness of the ending. This movie gets compared a lot to The Thing, and it's very easy to see why. There's that that snowbound setting. The all-male cast as well, I think.
Yeah, the isolation of the mistrust of anybody in a position of authority above them. Yeah, I completely get that.
Yeah, and the kind of like, it's that kind of like downtrodden dudes who have to deal with this thing that they're not prepared to deal with kind of thing. I think there's something that we can delve into a little bit about, like, there is a lack of presence of women in this movie. Yeah. And I don't think it's from an accident. I don't think it's an accident.
No, I think it definitely does play into the story because it is looking at like father-son relationships and such. Yeah,
and like because obviously Pietri's mother is dead for a start, So that's an obvious deliberate absence. But then we hear about Juso's mother, but we never see her. Because obviously we hear about her hairdryer and things like this. And, they mention... And obviously Pietri speaks on the phone to various children's mothers, saying, oh, if you've seen them, all this kind of thing. So it's interesting that we're in a setting where they seem to be very deliberately being like, there are women in this community who have a role in this community, but we're deliberately focusing on this small band of men and their dynamic. I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to say about this, and maybe this is a finished thing, I don't know, but there's definitely an element of they are talking about masculine relationships, especially with the father-son dynamic that's kind of at the centre of it, because we have the typical the dad being like, oh, you need to toughen up to the son kind of thing, but at the same time kind of sheltering him, and kind of there's this kind of weird push and pull hypocrisy where it's almost like he's trying to be what he thinks of as a father and as a mother at the same time.
I think, I'm not entirely sure exactly what the movie is going for, like you say, but I think maybe one of the things that it is trying to straddle the line of when talking about sort of masculine father and son relationships is the belief in Santa Claus is not exactly a point where a child where a boy would go to being a man, but that's definitely part of that that's when that's when a child first starts to lose those sort of fantasy ideas and stuff and starts to go into that transition. So clearly his dad doesn't want him to believe in Santa anymore, but also doesn't want him to watch him literally gutting a pig. Yeah, I think it's all part of that kind of transition, maybe.
But I think also there is a significance of that, because he's, when he says to him at the end, oh, you're quite the man, actually. That is an acknowledgement of oh, you're not just a little boy anymore. You are becoming a man. And I don't think it's in this... It's kind of interesting that we're praising this movie and slacking off Black Christmas. We know, listeners, all right? We know how it looks.
Yeah, we're very aware.
It's... But I think it's kind of... What I do like about this is that a lot of movies like this kind of annoy me when it's oh, the boy becomes the man, because it's always kind of about toxic stuff. It's always about the capability to do violence kind of thing. Whereas actually what I think this movie is saying is Pietri's becoming a man because he's taking responsibility. Yes. And yes, we do it in this kind of they'd have a slightly ironic centre to where he kind of does become the action hero at the end, But again,
even then, he doesn't descend into violence or anything. He just descends into cunning.
He only uses a gun. He only uses a gun to get attention from other people. And she fires it into the air to get everyone to stop bickering. So in a way, he only uses the tool of violence to create peace.
Yes. I think that's a very good way of putting it, yeah.
But also, it's that thing of I think it's conflating him, becoming a man, whether you want to phrase it that way, is becoming an adult, is with him stepping up to the plate and being part of the community. Whereas prior to that, we've only really seen him as an outsider.
Yeah, because when you consider it, what else were they gonna do? Yeah.
Exactly. They were just... Their plans were always really, short term.
Yeah, they were kill the elves, and he's no, we destroyed the Santa. That's how we...
Or even breaking it down to, we're going to try and sell this elf back. Not even being curious as to what this creature is or what else it could provide for us.
They see... Yeah, they don't see the long term, they just see the short term. Yeah, I completely agree.
Whereas, so I think it's interesting with what it's kind of doing with the theme of, boy becomes man. Because it also seems to be saying, you don't entirely need to put away childish things.
No, and I think the movie definitely says there is merit in still holding on to some of those ideas, because without them, they wouldn't have known what the fuck they were doing in the face of this insane threat that they're put in front of.
Yeah, and I think that's part of that line as well about oh, you're quite the man. It's his father acknowledging actually the qualities that you're bringing out and you're presenting today, these are good qualities.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
idea of he's clever and he thinks things through, and he's not just being he's not just resorting to violence or base things. And because of that, they all become incredibly rich at the end of the series.
And so that is the perfect point for us to discuss how fucking weird the ending to this movie is.
Yes. What do you want to describe the ending and talk about your perhaps your issues with it?
Do I have issues with it, or do I just think it's a little bit odd? So essentially, as we said, they've discovered this giant monster Santa thing, to which Pietri's dad and chubby bearded Ray-Bans guy, they cut off his horns.
Yes.
I don't think there's ever a point where they explain why they do that.
I think it's just a memento.
Like kind of tusks, like ivory, I guess. Like they're just like
Or like
souvenirs.
reindeer's horns, I guess. Is the...
Yeah, I suppose it's very not. They don't really go into it, I guess. But so they destroy evil horned Santa monster thing, which you never get a good look at, which is a very personal gripe. But I wish I could have seen what that looked like.
Yeah, I if this was a higher budget movie, yes.
Yeah. And definitely the low budget is something of the film's detriment, purely because some of those shots towards the end when you've got the Legion of... Council of Uncles, fuck it. The pervy Santa
No,
guys.
these are not the Legion of Uncles.
Okay, they're the enemies of the Legion of Uncles.
Yeah, this is the Legion of Binkses.
Binks v Uncles, let's do this. So yeah, some of those shots where you see like the army of naked old men versus...
Yeah.
A helicopter in the sky with 9-year-old boy hanging off a sack of children.
Yes, I mean it's
All
worth pointing out
bizarre
this movie is from 11 years ago as well. So like,
Yeah, it is.
CGI is a little dated.
Yeah, it's a little bit hokey, but for a low budget movie, pretty commendable, all things considered. So yeah, they destroy giant ass Santa dude, and then the elves just at that point they have nobody to be subservient to, so they're just trapped in a reindeer pen. And they have nothing to do with themselves.
They're just aimlessly wandering about.
Yeah. And so Pietro and his dad and the rest of the other dudes train them to become mole Santas.
Yes.
To then ship them across the world to be rented out as mole Santas for them to earn money. And that's how the movie ends. It literally ends on a shot of one of those mole Santas being crated up where it says on the box, rare exports. And it's like vaguely like the ending of fucking Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, so there's something because before that we see him training Pietro's dad training on how to not maul children.
That scene is bizarre. It's almost like they use it like dolls of children. They look like those fucking court dolls. Like, show me where you were touched on the doll kind of thing.
It's mental. And
he's showing her how to caress them on the cheek, and I was like, I don't remember ever fucking seeing a mole Santa that would caress me on the cheek, okay? That's not kosher. That's not okay. That's not cricket.
Hey, it's Finland. Anything goes over there. So yeah,
this podcast is not an indictment of women or Finland. I want to point that out.
So, what a thing to say. That's going to be our new intro catchphrase. Welcome to Kino Inferno, which is not an indictment of women or Finland. Anyway, yeah, so the thing about this is, this movie... Yeah, I hear what you're saying about the ending, Mark. And it's worth saying, this movie was written and directed by a guy called Jalmari Helander. I think I'm saying that right. And he and his brother, prior to the release of this movie, made 2 short films. One of which I believe is just called Rare Exports, and one of them is called the Rare Exports, the official safety rules.
Okay.
So when we refer to the laminated list of rules, that's what that short film is about. It's kind of humor, and these are more like comedic shorts than they are straight up horror movies. And it's about this company, this Rare Exports company, that ships these real mall Santas around the world. So this movie is kind of weirdly a prequel to those short films.
Wait. I mean, I can stop you for a second. Are you telling me that before I saw Rare Exports: A Christmas Tale, I needed to see 2 movies previous?
No, I don't. No, these short films.
Short films. So, I have to have seen this previously.
Not necessarily. I don't think.
Right. Okay. I mean, I'm going to say that that's what you're saying, and therefore it goes in the Inferno. I don't want to have to read notes before seeing a movie. No, I'm kidding.
No. But what I'm saying is, like, I think maybe that's why the ending feels a little weird, because it's kind of like, to the creators, it was like a foregone conclusion that it would end with.
Yeah, which we would never.
This company.
Yeah, because one thing that's worth pointing out as well is at the start of the movie we see the logo for the Rare Exports company.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we see that again at the end. So obviously, for anybody who had seen those short movies, I'm assuming that logo was part of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like, you don't. And to be clear, you don't have to have seen the short films to get this movie.
Well, I mean, I got it. I just thought that ending felt a bit weird.
Yeah, like, I hadn't seen them until after I saw the original movie. So not the original. You know what I'm saying? After I originally saw the movie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I personally don't mind the ending. It's again, it's that thing where it's like, it maybe could do with an extra couple of minutes, just to kind of go over like what the company is and have a few more gags and stuff like that. That said, this movie is, you know, mercifully brief.
Yeah, very much so. And again, I think that is one of its detriments, is that it's a bit too quick. It's a bit too wham and done, especially when you get to the third act, where that's where all the chaos is supposed to start. Again, that's where, like I mentioned earlier, they kind of reminds me a little bit of Gremlins, and to me, Gremlins gets truly great in its third act, and I think Rare Exports does the same, but there's not enough of it. Like, an extra 10 minutes would have been a godsend in this movie, I think.
I don't even think 10, I think 5. I think an extra 5 minutes would do it.
Well, before the credits, this movie is on for about an hour and 10, roughly.
Yeah, it's brief.
Yeah, it doesn't outstay its welcome. If anything, I would have, given it another cup of hot chocolate, personally.
Yeah, well, there you go. What I will say before we get into Kino Inferno, a few points that I wanted to point out. Number one, this movie has a great score.
Yeah,
it's very
definitely
atmospheric. Kind of reminiscent of movies like Gremlins, actually. It has that kind of like spooky Christmas type.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing where for the first like 2/3 of the movie, the horror elements aren't massively there. It's only when like naked cock out dudes show up. But even then, where in a lot of other movies, seeing a bunch of naked old men would probably be funny, the score and the way that it's edited really actually makes them threatening.
I think it's pretty funny in this.
Yeah, well, it is funny, but also like it treats it like a horror movie.
Yeah,
I think.
Like you're with the characters when they're experiencing the weirdness of it.
Yeah, because if I was just in the snow surrounded by naked old dudes, I'd be pretty fucking petrified myself.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to shout out, and this is in direct contrast to Black Christmas, this movie is incredibly well shot for the most part. In fact, for the entire movie.
Really.
My only gripes are like a few CGI moments, but I can forgive that.
They've clearly they shot in a good location. I think they found a good place to shoot it where they can put the camera basically anywhere and it looks good.
But also, like the lighting is really good. Like this is one of those things that people don't normally notice unless it's bad. But like as I was kind of going through this movie, the lighting's really really good. Like it has a sense of gloominess to it, but you can always see everything. There's never that element of it's so dark I can't see what's going on. Like when they have the Santa in the warehouse and stuff, and they're like he's hanging there, or he's like crouched in the corner. Like you always have this like interplay of light and shadow on his face, where you can see his entire facial features, but it still has that sense of like shadow. And he's
he always looks menacing, even in like any of the shots where he's brightly lit. Yeah, he looks menacing.
And it's just kind of like this is one of those things that is so easy for filmmakers to overlook. And I think filmmakers in America and Britain especially are bad for this. Like, lighting can add so much to a movie. And I know some of this movie is probably also very clever colour correction after the fact. But like,
yeah, of course, yeah.
But even so much of this I can tell by looking at it is on-set lighting that they've boosted with colour correction. Like, even so, the point still stands. When you compare that to something like Black Christmas, which probably had a higher budget, certainly is...
5 million was Black Christmas.
Okay, well, I don't know about that. I didn't check the...
No, I know that. It's 5 million.
No, I mean, I don't know what Rare Export's budget is.
Far less. Far less.
But, like, you would never tell. Like, you've watched them back-to-back, which, we kind of did.
Yeah,
Rare Exports looks more like a movie. Like,
It's more cinematic, definitely. Yeah.
And it's that thing of, like, this is something that I feel that a lot of movies, as I say, kind of overlook, is, like, lighting can cover up a multitude of budget issues. Like, if you have striking lighting, dramatic, dynamic lighting, your movie will not look cheap. And
well, I mean, this goes back as far as, like, the 1930s. Like, film noir, the reason why those movies are so shadowy is because they literally threw shadows up to hide how cheap the sets looked.
Yeah, because they're filmed in, like, fucking... the backlot of some fucking Warner Bros.
Yeah, like the walls were made of cardboard and shit. Like they did that lighting intentionally to cover up for flaws, and that became such an intrinsic part of the genre.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, like, just this movie, like Rare Exports, that is, it just goes to show what, like, a little bit of creativity, a little bit of imagination, and a whole lot of craft can kind of make out of a movie. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell people like this is, fucking Citizen Kane or whatever, but like this is a movie that I can put on for pretty much anyone and they will enjoy it. Like, my mum watched the movie because I said we were covering it for this podcast, and she unsurprisingly loved it. She said she was going to check out Black Christmas 19. In fact, she said she was about to watch it, and then I heard nothing back. But
maybe she saved herself. Maybe she did.
Yeah, well, I'll ask her about it after this. But anyway, the point is this: Kino or Inferno, Mark?
I'm going to give it Kino. I think it's a great little movie. It's probably going to end up as part of my sort of annual Christmas watching. And it's, honestly, it's actually quite nice to see a more modern movie. I mean, I say more modern. This was made, 11 years ago?
Yeah.
It's still kind of nice to see a more modern Christmas movie end up in my rotation.
We're so old.
We're so old.
I remember this movie coming out and being like, ooh, a modern horror movie.
But no, it's still nice to see like sort of Christmas set spooky movies are still being made, I guess. And yeah, this is definitely one that I'm going to watch next year. I've already watched it this year. So, the one film I've still not watched this year, because we're recording this on the 20th, I've still not watched the original Black Christmas, and hopefully that will wash away the taste of watching the 2019 one again.
I'm also going to give this movie Kino. Rare Exports is great. You should watch it. I mean, it's such a small time investment as well that even if you didn't like it that much, it's fucking 80 minutes of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's with credits.
Like, I've had shits that have lasted longer.
I've certainly had shits that have lasted longer. And, you know, I will kind of say this as well. Like, I'm a big fan of, like, this kind of Scandinavian horror movies that came out around this era that kind of broke through into the kind of mainstream over here. So, you know, your Dead Snows.
I love Dead Snow. That's a great movie.
Dead Snow is a cracking movie. Let the Right One In, you know, that kind of stuff. Which will almost certainly cover both of them at some point. But and this is definitely evocative of those movies, of that kind of small bubble where these movies were kind of breaking through into the mainstream over here and in America. Like, I
mean, another great one, if I'm just going to throw those kinds of movies out there, from around that sort of area of Europe as well, Cold Prey, I think, is such an underrated gem of horror from that time.
That's a good movie. I think there's just something about those movies where obviously you can make them on a relatively small budget because there are these just frozen wastelands, you know.
Yeah.
Just in the background that they can go to.
And it's an inherently scary place to make a film. I think that's the reason why, like, you know, in the 80s in America, summer camp slashers were such a big thing, because, you know,
it's the isolation.
Like, yeah, I feel like any kid that had gone to one of those summer camps probably felt like they, you know, if they ever got lost in the woods there, that was scary. Whereas, like, you know, being on a fucking snowy mountain, terrifying.
Yeah. It's cold all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the worst bit, I guess. Not the killing, just the cold.
That's not even true. But all these countries, like Sweden and Finland, they're warm in the summer. But
yeah, of course. It's just we're
skewed
by the movies.
I think I read that this movie was filmed in Norway, actually, which
oh really?
Is interesting. Yeah, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that Midsommar was filmed there as well. So even though it's set in Sweden, it's filmed in Norway. So
we also talked about Black Christmas tonight, which was shot in New Zealand.
Yeah, that one's really weird.
Yeah.
I imagine that's for tax reasons or something, but...
I mean, shot on a $5 million budget, they must have done some shit to, you know, cut corners,
it's Blumhouse in it. They'll cut every corner.
I mean, yeah, they're notorious for giving no money. Like, I'm pretty sure The Invisible Man was made for not shy of, like, what, $7 million or something?
Oh my god, The Invisible Man's so much better than Black Christmas.
That's such a good movie.
Dealing with similar themes.
In a much more intelligent and well thought out way, yes.
Yeah. And again, I mean, that's another movie where it uses a pre-existing character, a pre-existing IP, and does a twist on it. And it's look, we've slammed Black Christmas enough.
We've spewed enough bile over that one, yeah.
I don't want to see it as spewing bile. I'm just kind of like...
well, no, I think, yeah, that was definitely hyperbole on my part there, but I think it's just... All the good intentions that possibly went into making that movie just resulted in something that wasn't worthy of the kind of energy that was put into it. Yeah,
that's a toilet, and you know, look, it's hard to make a movie. It's even harder to make a good movie.
Yes, I would agree to you on that. There we go. Black Christmas 2019 in the fire.
Toilet.
In the fire toilet. We'll give it
the flaming toilet.
Yeah, we'll put it in the toilet and set it on fire. And then we have Rare Exports, which is in the pantheon of Kino now.
In the golden toilet.
You don't shit in the golden toilet, you just piss in it.
No, it's there for...
It's number ones only.
Don't be shitting in the golden toilet, you fucking animal.
You'll never
Anyway,
get the fucking pebble dash off. Anyway.
oh, good lord. Anyway, this has been Crimbo Inferno. Listen, you can find Kino Inferno on the internet. It's on Twitter, I guess.
That is where we live, yes.
It's on Twitter at Kino_Inferno /boobs. It's on YouTube at H-Bomber Guy. It's on Facebook at Funny Dog Videos.
And you can find us on Stitcher at Pen Island.
You can't find us on Stitcher.
We don't know what it is.
We fucking don't know what that shit is. We're on Apple. We're on Apple Podcasts.
We are.
We're down there as the Joe Rogan Experience.
That's what I was gonna say.
Oh no! Now people are going to think we like Joe Rogan. We don't.
We don't like Joe Rogan.
We don't like
Joe Rogan.
We don't.
No.
He's a penis.
He is a literal penis. Yes.
So anyway, a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to have a little break because it's Christmas, and neither of us can be asked to record for a couple of weeks.
I mean, you could have said we were going to go home and see our wives, but...
Well, I'm not married, and I've established that I live with my partner, so...
Yeah, that's true.
And you'll be too busy sucking cock down GAY anyway.
Wow, okay.
to visit your wife.
She knows what I get up to.
It's an arrangement. It's a marriage of convenience, like they had in the war. Look, anyway, we're clearly quite pissed. Let's end this. We're going to have a break for a bit. Probably a few weeks.
We're going to take a couple of weeks off, yeah.
Few weeks. We're going to be coming back at you at some point in January with, I think the next one we're going to do is Dune. Not the new one.
No,
the old one. And we're also going to do Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. And we're going to have our first guest star, who will remain nameless. It's Joe Rogan. No, it's not going to be Joe Rogan. It's going to be Dr. Jordan Peterson. No, it's not going to be any of these dickheads. It's going to be a friend of ours.
Who will remain anonymous until broadcast.
Yeah, build up.
Just because we like to have an element of mystery on this show.
He's going to be in the fucking comments anyway. So, he's going to be the comments. He am the comments.
That is true. He is comments personified.
Anyway, shut up, yeah. That's been Crimbo Inferno, the first annual Crimbo Inferno. It's getting messy. It's getting sloppy.
Of course it will.
Like, you love us. That's how we are. This could be a 3-hour episode.
It's fucking not.
I've been Aidan.
I've been Mark.
And I've been Santa Claus.
Is that who that is?
Yeah, it's always been Santa. He's always been watching. Waiting. His cock flapping in the breeze.
We'll put out milk and cookies for you.
You dare bribe Santa? I'm going to shove coal so far up your stocking you'll be coughing up diamonds.